Not in a hospital, not in your own bed, not even in a place that makes any kind of logical sense whatsoever, just a sewer. Not in a hospital, not in your own bed, not even in a place that makes any kind of logical sense whatsoever, just a sewer. I woke up in a sewer, dark, wet, smelling like everything wrong in the world, with a hunger so deep it felt like my bones were hollow. Congratulations, you have been reborn. Race, Ghoul. Rank, F. I stared at those words for a long time, read them 4 times. Congratulations, you have been reborn. Race, Ghoul. Rank, F. I stared at those words for a very long time, then read them again. F, not E, not D, F, the absolute bottom, the kind of rank that doesn't even get a category. It's just failure with a letter attached. I tried to move. Arms worked, legs worked, but everything felt different, sharper, heavier, more aware of every single thing around me. And the moment I registered that human scent, my stomach clenched so hard I doubled over on the wet floor. Full collapse. Great. That's when it became real. Not the system window, not the rank, the hunger. The hunger made it real in a way nothing else could. That's when it became real. Not the system window, not the rank, the hunger. The hunger made it real in a way nothing else could. System window blinked again. Available skills. 1. Skill name. Hunger. I focused on it because what else was I going to do? Skill description appeared below the name. It said, forces the host to eat more frequently than normal. Useless skill. Rank F. Useless. The system literally wrote the word useless in the description of my only skill. Not underwhelming, not situational. Useless. Thanks for the encouragement. Really. Deeply. Appreciated. Motivating stuff when you're sitting in a sewer with nothing but failure as a rank. I sat on the cold floor and tried to think clearly. My name was Lee June, 23 years old, normal student, no special talents. I remembered everything from my previous life because apparently rebirth packages include memory retention, which is the one decent perk so far. In this world, hunters appeared about 20 years ago. Portals opened across the earth. Monsters came through, millions of them. People started awakening in response, receiving ranks and skills to fight back the system. Ranked humans from F to SSS, 7 tiers of power. SSS-Rank hunters were basically living weapons, the kind of people who could level a building with a punch and walk away from the rubble without a scratch. Ghouls had existed in this world longer than the portals. They lived underground, in ruins, in abandoned places humans stopped checking. The hunting guilds labeled ghouls as threats and authorized their elimination without restriction or investigation, clean and simple, because ghouls ate humans, or what was left of humans. The guild reports called it a dietary incompatibility issue. Beautiful bureaucratic language for something horrible, and now I was one of them. Ghoul, rank F, 1 skill. The skill is useless, according to the system itself. Excellent, great start. I tried activating the hunger skill to understand anything about it. Nothing happened immediately, just the same hollow ache in my chest. So it activates on its own. Fine, that means I need to eat. And thinking about what ghouls eat made me very uncomfortable with my current situation. The answer arrived before I finished the thought. Something moved in the tunnel ahead. Big shadow. Glowing red eyes. Not friendly. A rat, but not a normal rat. Mutated. Roughly the size of a large cat with teeth that caught what little light existed down here. We stared at each other in the darkness for about 3 seconds. I was thinking, which one of us is the predator right now exactly? The rat apparently reached a different conclusion than I did because it launched itself straight at my face without any further negotiation. I caught it with both hands. And then I was surprised, genuinely surprised, by how fast my hands moved to intercept it. The ghoul body was different, reflexes faster than human baseline. Strength more than the size would suggest. Everything felt more precise. System window flashed. Absorption complete. Hunger skill. Analysis finished. Data acquired from target. I had no idea what that meant. System window flashed. Absorption complete. Hunger skill. Analysis finished. Data acquired from target. I had no idea what that meant yet. Data acquired from target. I frowned at that. Data from a rat? What possible useful information exists in a sewer rat? But the system was already showing me the breakdown. Rat speed, partially copied. Evasion instinct, partially copied. Olfactory sensitivity, partially copied. I read it 3 times. Then I stood up very slowly. Then I read it one more time just to be absolutely sure I understood. Copied. I ate the rat and received a portion of its abilities through the absorption process. The skill didn't make me hungrier. It copied whatever I consumed. Every single thing I ate would leave something behind in me. Every target, every absorption. A piece of their capability transferred to mine. Hunger skill, rank F. Description, useless. Actual function, The most terrifying ability that has ever existed in this world. That's why the system called it useless. Because if anyone knew what it actually did, the guilds would never stop hunting me. I sat back down on the sewer floor and started smiling. In my previous life, I read a lot of Manhwa. I knew how these stories worked. The rule is always the same, and the weakest seeming skill turns out to be the strongest one. Always. Without exception. Every single time. The only question was, how far does it scale? Rats gave me speed and smell. What does an SSS-Rank hunter give me when I absorb them? I didn't know yet. But the fact that I was already thinking about SSS-Rank targets while sitting in a sewer with rat on my hands said something about my mental state. The next 3 days I spent entirely underground, learning to control the new body, testing its limits, understanding what I was working with. Vision in complete darkness, fully functional. The ghoul eyes processed low light like it was broad daylight. Massive advantage already. Smell range exceeded anything human. I could differentiate individual scents from hundreds of meters away without concentrating. Regeneration was faster than human baseline. Cuts closed in minutes. Bruises faded in hours. The body repaired itself continuously and quietly. The one problem was food. I tested it on day 2 because I needed to know. Found a discarded piece of bread near a drainage grate. Tried to eat it. The ghoul body rejected it within seconds. The reflex was immediate and humiliating. No explanation given. Just total rejection of anything that wasn't alive or recently was. Okay, fine. Only living things. Only absorb targets. That's the diet now. Moving on. Adapting. This is manageable. Over 3 days, I absorbed 8 mutated rats, 2 large beetle-type creatures that nested in the drainage system, and 1 3-tailed thing of unclear classification. Each time the system copied something different. Beetle shell durability, partially copied. Tail creature venom, partially copied. 1 rat's echolocation, partially copied. Partially meant I wasn't a bat, but I was navigating completely dark tunnels without touching the walls, which was already more than I could do 3 days ago. My rank ticked up. System showed F+. The plus sign was the best thing I'd seen since waking up in the sewer. Progress is progress. On day 4, I heard voices above, several of them. Heavy boots on metal grating. The footsteps moved with discipline. Trained movement, not civilian. Hunters. I knew before I smelled them. But the smell confirmed it. Metal, sweat, and underneath that, something else. A warmth, an energy, power radiating off living bodies. I pressed myself against the wall and went completely still. The evasion instinct from the absorbed rats kicked in automatically. Useful. They were walking along the grate overhead, talking about sector clearance, about ghoul activity reported in this area, about making it thorough this time. I held my breath. Ghouls don't need to breathe constantly, another advantage I hadn't expected. The need for air was reduced significantly from human baseline. The hunters passed. I waited until their footsteps faded completely before moving. Then the system window appeared without warning. High-level skill users detected in vicinity. Hunger skill activated in analysis mode, acquiring target data from range. Target identified. Hunter rank A, Kim Sanju. Primary skill, steel skin. Range, 40 meters. Skill analysis, generating protective metallic layer over body surface upon impact. Rank A, steel skin. If that transferred to me even partially, a punch wouldn't break my bones anymore. An attack that would kill a normal ghoul would bounce. I stared at the system readout in the dark and thought very carefully about what I was considering. The gap between F+ and A rank was not small. Absorbing a rank, a hunter wasn't something I could do with my current level. The gap was enormous. F+ against rank A was not a fight. It was a burial. But the fact that the system could already analyze A rank targets from range, that meant the potential was there. The ceiling wasn't closed. It was just very, very high right now. I needed more base, more small absorptions. Build speed, durability, strength, instincts. Establish a foundation before approaching anything that could fight back effectively. The smart play was patience. The exciting play was charging a rank A hunter with the body of something that just leveled up from eating rats. I chose smart. Deeper into the tunnel system, I found creatures that had come through minor portal breaches, low-rank dungeon monsters that settled in the infrastructure. The system labeled them low-rank dungeon creatures, F and E tier. For my current level, excellent practice. For the tunnel ecosystem, my arrival was very bad news for them. The first real fight came on day 5, an E-rank acid slug, size of a large human, slow movement, corrosive slime coating its entire surface. I attacked from above, combined speed from the rat absorptions with the aggression instinct from the 3-tailed creature, and frankly, a lot of frustration about the situation I was in. The slug didn't react in time. We fought. I won. The absorption process completed and the system showed the result. Acid regeneration acquired, partially. Host cells now repair at accelerated rate when damaged. Repair speed increases proportionally with damage severity. I looked at a scratch on my forearm from the slug's teeth. Watched it close in about 10 seconds while I stood there. The implications of that hit me harder than the fight had. The more damaged I was, the faster I healed. That meant heavy damage was recoverable. That meant fights that should kill me might not. This was not a useless skill. This was not even a strong skill. This was a broken skill dressed up in the worst possible description to hide what it actually did. By the end of week 1, I had absorbed roughly 20 creatures. Small dungeon monsters, tunnel mutants, 2 creatures that had apparently crawled up from lower portal breaches. The body had changed. Not visibly. I still looked like a 23-year-old guy from the outside. Ghouls at low rank could maintain human appearance. One more advantage. But internally the accumulation was real. Speed was 3 times the baseline I started with. Regeneration was stable and automatic. The sensory range kept expanding. System registered my rank as F+. I knew I was approaching the threshold for E rank. One more significant absorption would probably push the transition. On day 8, I made the decision to surface. Not permanently, just reconnaissance. See the city, understand the current situation, get information. I chose night and an industrial district on the city's eastern edge. Warehouses, minimal foot traffic, no registered guild patrol routes according to what I remembered from my previous life. Climbed out through a drainage grate, stood on actual pavement, looked up at an actual sky for the first time in 8 days. The sky was gray, overcast. The smells hit immediately. Exhaust food from restaurants blocks away, thousands of humans, metal, industrial chemicals, and underneath all of it, the faint warm signature of hunter energy somewhere in the distance. I stood there and just breathed. Ghoul on a city street. Rank F+. One composite skill made of rat instincts and slug healing. 0 allies, 0 resources, 0 plan beyond survive. Great start. Really pulling it together here. Objectively, one of the stronger openings to a new life I could have managed. But I didn't know yet that on the other side of the city that same evening, something was happening that would make my situation significantly more complicated. The first SSS-Rank hunter had just disappeared. Not died, not retired, disappeared, no body, no scene, no explanation, just gone. His name was Park Jung-ho. SSS-Rank. Specialization, speed. The reports later would say he could cover a kilometer in under 2 seconds at full output. They said no one in the SSS tier could track him when he didn't want to be tracked. They said he was essentially untouchable at full speed in open terrain. Now they were saying he'd been missing for 3 days, and the guilds had no leads, no witnesses, and no idea where to even begin looking. SSS-Rank hunter missing. Where is Park Jung-ho? Guilds in crisis. The headline took up half the front page. I read it twice. SSS-Rank hunter missing. Where is Park Jung-ho? Guilds in crisis. The headline took up half the front page. I read it twice. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. An SSS-Rank hunter disappearing without a trace. Genuinely interesting. Very concerning for someone who was not involved in any way. Because it was not me. I want to be clear about that. 8 days in the sewer, rank F+. The most powerful thing I'd fought was an acid slug. I had nothing to do with Park Jung-ho. But I understood that the guilds wouldn't be making that distinction in their investigation. Missing SSS rank meant maximum threat level response. That meant more hunters on the streets. More hunters meant more risk for anything they classified as a threat. Ghouls were always on that list regardless of rank or recent history. I needed to establish cover, a human identity, a reason to exist above ground that didn't immediately trigger a ghoul classification and elimination response. Ghouls who survived long-term in this world mostly did it one of 3 ways. Isolated, hiding completely, never surfacing. Group-based, strength in numbers but high visibility. Or infiltration, living among humans, maintaining the disguise constantly. Infiltration was the hardest path, and clearly the only viable option for what I was planning to do. Hiding underground forever wasn't a strategy, because I couldn't absorb hunters from a sewer. I needed proximity, I needed access. I needed to be somewhere that strong targets moved through regularly. Lee Jun. That was still my name. Beneath my documents, my enrollment records, my rental agreement, all of it existed in the city's databases from my previous life. The apartment was a small one-room unit in the university district, rented under my name. Key was exactly where I used to keep it, under the 3rd step of the stairwell. Memory from a previous life is strange. You remember everything, the layout of rooms, where you left things, what the place smelled like, but it doesn't feel like home anymore. It felt like walking into a museum exhibit about someone I used to be. Everything preserved, nothing relevant to my current situation. I sat on the bed and ran through the system data quietly. The hunger skill was running constant background analysis. Passive scan of everything within sensory range. Rank F+. Skills accumulated, speed enhancement, minor evasion instinct, minor, olfactory range, moderate, acid regeneration, moderate, echolocation, trace, shadow awareness, trace. Not impressive as a list, but each item on that list was something that hadn't existed in me 9 days ago. The trajectory was clear, even if the starting point was embarrassing. The first actual problem arrived the next morning. Someone knocked on the door. My neighbor, an elderly woman who had apparently noticed I'd been gone for a week. She brought rice. She said I looked terrible and should eat something, and she had made extra. She was genuinely concerned and genuinely kind. I took the bowl, thanked her, closed the door, put the rice on the table, and stared at it for 30 seconds while the situation sank in. The ghoul body's response to looking at that rice was immediate and clear. No, absolutely not. Not food. Not relevant. Please remove this from the vicinity. I stared at the rice for 3 minutes. Then I poured it carefully down the sink, rinsed the bowl, and spent the next 10 minutes cleaning my teeth out of habit from a life where that meant something. Ghoul with a toothbrush, standing at a sink that now smelled like rinsed rice. This was my life now. This was what rebirth looked like. By noon, the hunger was building again. Not critical yet, but consistent. The small tunnel absorptions from the past week were burning through faster than expected. I needed a larger source, something with more energy density than a mutated rat or E-rank slug, something that wouldn't require me to hunt in a crowded city street. The system answered before I finished forming the question. Low-rank monster detected. Range, 300 meters. Location, basement of adjacent building. Type, shadow parasite. Rank, E. Behavior, feeds on fear responses from host population above. Current activity duration, estimated 32 days. Effect, recurring nightmares and building residents. Shadow parasite. That explained why half the building had looked exhausted for the past month, according to what my neighbor had mentioned while handing me rice I couldn't eat. I went at night through the maintenance access. The basement was dark in the way that has texture to it, a quality of darkness that seemed almost deliberate. The shadow parasite looked like a jellyfish that had given up on having a body, just a drifting mass of shadow with tendrils that reached in every direction. When the tendrils touched me, I felt it immediately. Fear, cold, and something that wasn't mine bleeding into my thoughts. Imposed panic, manufactured terror. The instinct was to run. The hunger said otherwise. I focused on the hunger and let everything else become secondary. We fought in the dark. The parasite had reach, and the fear induction made every second of it deeply unpleasant. But unpleasant and dangerous are different things. Absorption complete. Shadow parasite. Rank E. 2 skills acquired. The system listed them out slowly like it was reading from a report. Shadow concealment. Partial fusion with shadow environment. Significantly reduces visibility in low light conditions. Effect scales with ambient darkness level. Emotional perception. Passive reception of strong emotional signatures from nearby living beings. Range, approximately 20 meters. Cannot be deactivated. Shadow concealment. I tested it immediately, stepped into the corner of the room and pushed the skill without knowing exactly how. I didn't disappear, but I became wrong to look at. The eye wanted to slide away. The brain wanted to classify the space as empty and move on. Emotional perception was already active. I could feel the confusion and mild distress of residents 2 floors above as background noise. The nightmares would stop for them now. I decided to count that as a charitable act and went back upstairs. The nightmares would stop for the building. A good deed by accident. The next morning, the city news reported the second disappearance. While I'd been fighting a shadow monster in a basement, another SSS-Rank hunter had vanished. Sarah. SSS-Rank. Mental combat specialization. Described in every report as the most powerful telepath currently active in the region. Powerful telepath operating in the Asian region, capable of incapacitating multiple high-rank hunters simultaneously. Gone. Same pattern as Park Jung-ho. No fight, no scene, no witnesses, no physical evidence. Just a hunter at full power who ceased to exist in any traceable way. The guilds announced emergency protocols. All solo missions suspended for ranks B and below. SSS-Rank hunters assigned protective observation teams. 2 SSS-Rank disappearances inside a week. The guilds were calling it an extinction-level threat to the hunter hierarchy. I read the news on my phone and thought through the implications carefully. 2 of the most powerful humans alive, gone without leaving a mark. Whatever was doing this wasn't operating at my level. F+ rank with rat instincts and slug healing was not responsible for making SSS-Rank hunters disappear silently. But the guilds wouldn't think that way. A missing SSS rank triggered maximum response. Maximum response meant every classified threat in the city got reviewed. Ghouls were always on the threat list. If they swept this district and found an active ghoul with no registered location and no clan affiliation, the questions would not go well for me. I needed to accelerate, get to E rank, then D rank, get strong enough that the gap between me and an average hunter started closing meaningfully. And I needed to do it while maintaining the Lee Jun identity without any of the roughly 40,000 humans around me noticing anything wrong. University resumed the following week. Lee Jun had been absent for 10 days, acceptable range, no formal absence violation. I showed up to morning registration looking like someone who had experienced a difficult personal situation, which was technically accurate. The campus was familiar from my previous life and from the memory that came with this body. Same buildings, same layout, same crowded halls with the same smell of coffee and stress. Walking through it felt strange in a specific way, like playing a video game set in a place you used to live. Familiar, but not yours. Recognizable, but not real. The emotional perception skill was overwhelming in a crowd. Anxiety, excitement, irritation, boredom, all of it pressing against my awareness simultaneously. I found a corner table in the cafeteria and tried to filter it down. Focus on the immediate. Ignore the background noise of collective student stress. That's when the system window appeared. Quietly, urgently. High-level skill user detected. Range, 15 meters. Analyzing. Target, Kim Tae-yang. Hunter rank B. Primary skill, body enhancement. Multiplicative physical stat amplification during activation. Enhancement ratio scales with rank level. I didn't move, didn't look up immediately, kept my hands around a cup of coffee I couldn't drink, and very carefully scanned the room. He was sitting 4 tables away, young, mid-20s, unremarkable appearance, which was itself remarkable because B-rank hunters usually had a presence that registered, no guild insignia visible, civilian clothes, but the subtle outline at his hip was the shape of an artifact holder, not a weapon holster. Combat artifact, standard hunter equipment. The emotional perception gave me his baseline. Calm, mildly bored, something underneath that felt like patience. Not here for me, not hunting anything, just present. The physical stats, the activation ratio, even a partial transfer would accelerate everything significantly. That was the calculation. The physical stats, the activation ratio, even a partial transfer would accelerate everything significantly. That was the clear calculation. Obviously impossible. Obviously not happening. Obviously a situation requiring patience and better planning. I sat there anyway. Obviously impossible. Obviously not happening. Obviously a situation requiring patience and better planning. I stayed anyway and watched. I sat with my undrinkable coffee and watched Kim Tae-young sit with his actual coffee and felt the distance between F+ and rank B like a physical thing. I sat for a while after he left, thinking about what the hunger skill was actually doing in the background at every single moment. I sat for a while after he left, thinking about what the hunger skill was actually doing in the background at every single moment. Every moment of every day it was running. Passive analysis of everything in range, building profiles on targets, identifying skill signatures, cataloging potential. It wasn't just a copy function, it was a constant acquisition system, a perpetual intake of information about every powerful thing I came near. The rat instinct I absorbed on day 1 told me when something dangerous was approaching. The slug regeneration ran without me thinking about it. The shadow concealment activated at dusk automatically. Every absorption was integrating, not just adding to a list, actually becoming part of how the body functioned at a baseline level. If that trend continued, if every significant absorption built into the foundation more deeply, then the ceiling wasn't just high. The ceiling might not exist. I walked back to the apartment that evening and sat on the floor of the empty room because sitting on the furniture felt like lying to myself about what I was. System displayed the current status, rank, F+. Approaching E rank threshold. Estimated absorptions needed for rank transition. 2 to 3 significant E rank targets. 2 to 3. I could do that. There were dungeon monsters below the city, parasite creatures in abandoned buildings, low-rank threats that the guilds hadn't prioritized for clearance. Each one brought me closer to the point where I could think about approaching a human hunter without immediately dying. What I needed was a pattern, a routine that kept Lee Jun visible and normal above ground while the ghoul underneath did what it needed to do. Student during daylight hours, absorb at night, sleep 4 hours because ghouls don't need more than that. Repeat until the rank gap closed to something manageable, simple, sustainable, boring enough to be invisible, dangerous enough that every day was technically a survival exercise. The next 3 days ran exactly to that pattern. University in the day, hunting in the tunnels and abandoned infrastructure at night. Day 9, absorbed an E-rank tunnel crawler, a centipede-type creature with reinforced shell segments. Acquisition, shell durability, minor layer of impact resistance added to skin surface. Day 10, absorbed an F-rank shadow eel that had been disrupting electrical systems in a maintenance corridor. Acquisition, electrical resistance, partial, minor shock absorption. Day 11, tracked and absorbed a mid-E rank creature the system identified as a void feeder, a predator that hunted other dungeon monsters. First real challenge. First real fight that lasted more than 30 seconds. Acquisition from the Void Feeder was the most significant so far. Predator instinct, advanced threat assessment and combat positioning, hunger sensitivity, range of the absorption skill's passive scan increased by 40%. That number changed how I could operate entirely. I could feel the difference in energy density between a rank E creature and a rank D from 2 blocks away without concentrating. I could feel the difference in energy density between a rank E creature and a rank D from 2 full blocks away without concentrating. And 2 blocks away, on the morning of day 12, I felt something that made me stop walking in the middle of the university courtyard. Something strong, not human strong, not hunter strong in the way Kim Taeyang had registered. Something on a different scale from anything I'd felt. The system processed it slowly, taking longer than any previous analysis. The result appeared in stages, line by line, reluctantly. Warning, high-tier entity detected. Range, 112 meters. Classification in progress. Then, nothing for 5 seconds. Warning, high-tier entity detected. Range, 112 meters. Classification in progress. Then the system went slow. I stood completely still while students walked around me. Someone asked if I was okay. I said yes, without moving my eyes from the building across the courtyard. Classification complete. Entity type, hunter. Rank, SSS. Identity restricted. Primary skill restricted. Secondary skills restricted. Restricted. The system couldn't fully read an SSS-Rank hunter's profile from range, or wouldn't, or the gap between my current rank and their level was too wide for complete analysis. But it could feel them. And I could feel them. And the hunger skill was doing something I hadn't experienced before, a pulling sensation, like standing near a massive drain. The SSS-Rank hunter existed in a building across the courtyard for approximately 4 minutes. Then the pressure shifted and faded. They'd moved, left the area. I stayed where I was for another 2 minutes processing what had just happened inside my body. An SSS-Rank had passed within 90 meters of me. She looked up from the textbook, looked directly at me, and smiled in the way that people smile when they've been aware of your attention for a while and have decided to acknowledge it. "You're scanning me," she said. Normal conversational volume. "I've been watching you do it for the last 4 minutes. You're not very subtle yet." I said nothing. She went back to her textbook. "I'm not going to report you," she added without looking up. "You haven't done anything reportable yet." She turned a page. I watched her turn the page and thought about every possible interpretation of what had just happened. Whatever she was, she could feel the hunger skill's passive scan, which meant she was sensitive enough to detect E-rank energy operations at range, from within an active concealment. And she wasn't alarmed by it, which meant either she'd seen it before, or she knew what it was, or she was simply that far above it that it registered as mildly interesting rather than threatening. She closed the textbook, picked up her tray, stood up and said, "The thing you're looking for isn't in the university district. You're wasting time here." Then she walked away. Normal pace, completely unremarkable. I sat with my undrinkable coffee and ran back over the last 30 seconds several times in my head. The thing you're looking for. She knew what I was looking for, or she thought she did, or she was testing what I'd do with the information. Every option was interesting. Every option was potentially a trap. Every option was also potentially the most important lead I'd found in 15 days. I looked at the passive scan data the hunger skill had managed to collect during the 4 minutes she'd known I was watching. Mixed energy signature. Human baseline with layered additions. The additions didn't follow any pattern I recognized from the hunter profiles or dungeon creature classifications. But the texture of it was familiar in a way I couldn't immediately place. Something about the layering reminded me of my own composite signature. Layering reminded me of my own signature, the accumulated composite of everything I'd absorbed over 15 days. She was absorbed too. Or something had happened to her that produced the same accumulation effect. Or she was something entirely different that just happened to feel similar from a certain angle. I didn't know. I needed to know. But I also needed to not follow a complete stranger who just identified my hidden scanning ability on the basis of one cryptic comment. I needed to be smarter than that. I also needed to figure out what she meant by the thing you're looking for isn't in the university district, because that comment assumed she knew what I was looking for. And if she knew what I was looking for, then there was a significant chain of implication that needed unpacking. First thing first, get out of the cafeteria. Stop sitting with undrinkable coffee drawing passive observation from unknown hybrid entities. I stood up, walked out, and spent the rest of the day in class trying to look like Lee June, the student, instead of thinking about the fact that someone in this university could feel my skill operating at range and had decided to leave me a cryptic directional hint rather than call the guild emergency line. Insufficient understanding of rank A and above energy dynamics, insufficient allies or information sources. The list of gaps was long. insufficient understanding of rank A and above energy dynamics, insufficient allies or information sources. The gap list was long. Current threats, guild monitoring device in building, grid search by Iron Vanguard assets, unknown rooftop observer, mysterious hybrid entity with directional information, and somewhere in this city, whatever was making SSS-Rank hunters disappear. Current advantages, hunger skill scalability, shadow concealment, emotional perception. Complete absence from any guild records as a threat. Nobody was looking for me specifically. Yet, that word carried everything. The thing you're looking for isn't in the university district. She'd said it like she expected me to understand. I looked at the ceiling and thought about what I was looking for. Rank advancement, information, safety, understanding of the SSS disappearances, before they became a problem I couldn't avoid. If she was pointing me away from the university district, she was pointing me somewhere else. And the only places that felt relevant to my actual objectives were the areas with the highest concentration of hunter activity, the locations associated with the SSS disappearances, or whatever underground infrastructure the guild sweeps hadn't covered yet. One of those options was significantly more interesting than the others. I got up, changed into the darkest clothes in the apartment, and went to see what was outside the university district at night, the waterfront. The grid search pattern I'd observed from the cafe yesterday covered the commercial district and the university area comprehensively. But east of the waterfront, past the commercial zone, there was an industrial area that the guild assets hadn't touched in any of the sweeps I'd tracked. Old industrial district, decommissioned port infrastructure, the kind of area that gets designated for urban development and then sits untouched for 15 years while the permits process. The hunger skills range at E rank could reach 90 meters. In an open industrial space with no crowd noise to filter, the effective read was even further. I found a vantage point on the roof of a decommissioned warehouse and extended the passive scan outward to the maximum 90-meter range available. The district was quiet. Loading infrastructure, empty storage buildings, rusting service roads, the signature of an urban area between functions, used but unloved. And underneath all of that, 60 meters below ground level, far deeper than the standard guild clearance operations would sweep, something large, patient, old in the way that mountains are old. Not a creature, not a person. Something that existed in the space between those categories. The hunger skill ran its analysis and returned 3 words before stopping entirely. I had never seen the system stop mid-analysis before this moment. Do not approach. Then the system went quiet in a way I'd never experienced before, like it had said everything it was prepared to say on the subject, and was now waiting for me to make a decision. I stood on the warehouse roof in the night wind and looked at the empty industrial district and thought about the fact that the hunger skill, whatever was 60 meters below the old port infrastructure, was above the skill's willingness to analyze. That had never happened before. Whatever was 60 meters below the old port infrastructure was above the skill's willingness to analyze. That had never happened before. Do not approach. I took that advice, climbed down from the warehouse, walked away from the industrial district at a pace that I hoped looked casual to anyone watching. Got 3 blocks away before the system spoke again. One line. This is where the SSS hunters came. Target profile acquisition pending sufficient host rank. Target profile acquisition. The skill was planning to absorb it, whatever it was. Eventually, when I was strong enough. The thing you're looking for isn't in the university district. She knew. The hybrid entity in the cafeteria had known about the industrial district. She'd pointed me here, which meant she knew what was here, which meant she was connected to the disappearances in some way that I didn't understand yet. Or she knew who was. Either way, she was relevant. I walked home through the dark city streets with the shadow concealment running at full passive and the emotional perception filtering out the background of a city asleep. E rank. 15 days, 1 useless skill. 3 SSS hunters gone. An unknown entity under the port that even the system refused to fully analyze. 3 SSS-Rank hunters gone. A guild grid search running overhead. A monitoring device in my building. An unidentified hybrid entity giving me directional hints. And something ancient 60 meters below a decommissioned port that the hunger skill had looked at and said, not yet. I got back to the apartment, sat on the floor and wrote it all down in the notebook. All of it. Every detail from the rooftop to the port signal. Then I wrote, tomorrow, find the hybrid entity, get more information, don't get caught, don't get absorbed by whatever is under the port, don't give the guild censor any reason to flag this address. Simple goals, achievable goals, probably. Rank F Ghoul with a useless skill. Still alive on day 15, honestly doing better than expected. Drop a comment if you already figured out what's under the port. Let's see who's paying attention to the details. Day 16 started the same way every day had started since the rebirth, with hunger. Not the kind you ignore, the kind that reminds you what you are. I lay on the apartment floor for exactly 4 minutes before getting up. Ghouls don't need much sleep. 4 hours was plenty. The body was already running its background processes. Passive scan active. Monitoring device in the basement. Still there, still running. No new energy signatures in the building. The neighbor 2 floors up was already awake. The coffee smell drifting through the walls into the hallway confirmed it without me checking. I had a problem that needed solving before anything else. The hybrid entity from the cafeteria knew I existed, knew what I was doing, knew where to find me. That was too much information in the wrong hands. Either I found her first and understood what she wanted, or I spent every day waiting for her to make a move I couldn't predict. Neither option was comfortable. The first was at least actionable. The A-Rank's energy moved through the campus in a methodical sweep, north to south, then east to west, then a slower pass through the highest density areas, for the emotional perception to pick up a texture of focused concentration from the direction of the library. 11 long seconds. Then it moved on, continued the sweep, departed the campus perimeter 20 minutes later. I breathed out for the first time in a while. Then it moved on, continued the sweep, departed the campus perimeter 20 minutes later. I breathed out slowly for the first time. The A-Rank hadn't found anything. The scan they were running was looking for high-level threats, SSS class or near SSS energy signatures. E-Rank registered below their interest threshold. For now, that was the important qualifier. For now, E-Rank was beneath their threshold. That would change the moment I absorbed something significant. The moment I absorbed a significant B rank or higher target, that would change. The signature would jump. The passive scans would register something new in the area. I needed to be somewhere else when that happened. Somewhere without a connection to Lee Jun's registered address. After class, I walked across the city to a district I'd identified the previous week. Commercial zone on the waterfront, high traffic, multiple exits, underground parking that connected to old maintenance tunnels the guild clearance operation hadn't covered. Found a cafe with corner seating and a view of 3 different street angles, and sat there for 2 hours, just running the passive scan and mapping the energy signatures of everyone who passed. 2 D-rank hunters off duty and walking together. Probably friends, relaxed, emotional red. 1 C-rank operating solo, moving with purpose, active duty or personal business, no A-rank presence. And then 1 more thing on the scan. A signature that didn't fit the hunter pattern or any dungeon creature classification I'd encountered before. Not a hunter, not a dungeon creature. Something that operated differently. Quiet, contained, almost deliberately ambiguous. Like a signature that knew how to be unreadable. The system struggled with it. Analysis kept returning incomplete results. Unknown entity type. Rank assessment. Inconclusive. Behavioral pattern. Observational. Observational. Something was watching the street from I turned the scan until I found the angle. From the rooftop of a building 3 blocks north. Whatever it was, it had been there for at least 30 minutes before I arrived. It was watching the waterfront district with patience that didn't feel human. I paid for the coffee I hadn't touched and left through the back exit without looking toward the rooftop. Didn't want to confirm I'd noticed. Or watching everything, including me, and not reacting yet. Either way, time to not be in this district. I left without looking back. Or watching everything, including me, and not reacting yet. Either way, time to not be in this district. I left without looking back. The walk back to the apartment took me through a market street, busy enough that my presence was entirely unremarkable. The hunger skill cataloged everyone it passed. The baker with no skill signature at all. A teenager with a faint F rank awakening that she probably didn't even know about yet. A merchant with D rank energy who'd clearly stopped developing years ago. Kim Taeyang, the B rank from the cafeteria. Same calm emotional signature. Same practiced passivity. Same Iron Vanguard affiliation. Kim Taeyang, the B rank from the cafeteria. Same calm emotional signature. Same practiced passivity. Same Iron Vanguard affiliation. The system flagged him the moment I was within range. Same analysis as before. Body enhancement, B rank, Iron Vanguard affiliation, Iron Vanguard. Same guild as the A rank sweep on campus. This was not coincidence twice in one day. They were running overlapping coverage patterns. They were grid searching. The guild was running multiple assets through civilian areas in overlapping patterns, looking for whatever was connected to the SSS disappearances. Kim Taeyang wasn't looking for me specifically. He was looking for anomalies, energy patterns that didn't fit normal classification, movements that suggested non-human coordination. I walked past him on the other side of the street at normal pace. Emotional perception registered his awareness level, general attention, not specific focus. His awareness, he noticed me the way anyone notices passing pedestrians. General attention, no specific focus. I kept walking, turned the corner, found a side street, and stopped with my back against the wall, letting the scan run on the direction I'd come from. The hunger skill was doing the preliminary scan thing it had learned. mapping Kim Taeyang's energy signature from the distance, building the profile. B rank, body enhancement. If I could get close enough for full absorption contact, actual physical contact, the acquisition would include the core of that skill, not a partial, not a trace copy. The rank jump from that alone would be significant. E to high D at minimum, possibly D plus depending on how much transferred. But B rank hunters didn't get touched by E rank ghouls and alleys without consequences. The physical gap was real. Kim Taeyang at full body enhancement output could probably walk through a wall. I could not currently walk through walls. Patience. More small absorptions first. Get to D rank through safer targets. Then approach B rank from a position that didn't involve immediate elimination. I pushed away from the wall and went home through the less trafficked route, keeping the shadow concealment passive and the scan active the whole way. That night, the system flagged something in the apartment building. Not a monster this time. Something smaller, quieter, harder to classify. A device. Installed in the electrical panel in the basement. Faint hunter signature energy source, the kind guilds used for area monitoring equipment. They'd swept the building. Not a ghoul clearance sweep. A monitoring installation. A sensor network that would flag unusual energy patterns in the building and report back to guild analysis. I sat on the floor of my apartment and thought about that for a long time. The monitoring device couldn't read me at E rank from that distance if I kept the passive suppression on my signature. But if I absorbed something significant and the rank spiked, the sensor would catch the energy fluctuation and log it. And a logged energy fluctuation in a building registered under Lee Jun's address would generate a follow-up inquiry. And a follow-up inquiry on Lee Jun would reveal that Lee Jun had been absent for 11 days, around the time 3 SSS-Rank hunters disappeared. The investigation logic didn't have to be accurate. It just had to generate enough interest to send someone to look more closely. I needed to not be here when my rank spiked. I needed a location with no monitoring, no registered connection to my identity, and enough distance from the university district that the energy change didn't map back to this address. I also needed to eat. The E-rank transition had accelerated the hunger cycle significantly. The tunnel sweeps had cut off my primary hunting ground. And the rooftop observer I'd spotted earlier was still an unknown variable. Too many problems. Not enough rank, not enough information, not enough time. This was day 15 of being a Rank F Ghoul with a useless skill. And somehow I was already in the middle of an SSS-Rank disappearance investigation, a guild grid search, a monitoring device in my building, and an unknown observer on a waterfront rooftop. I lay down on the floor of the apartment and looked at the ceiling and thought, the Manhwa protagonist always figures it out. Always. Without exception. I just needed to remember that I was the protagonist. And protagonists don't die in Act 1, no matter how bad the setup looks. The next morning I was back at university, sitting in the cafeteria with coffee I couldn't drink, running the scan at full passive range, when the system flagged something entirely new. Not a hunter, not a dungeon creature, not the ambiguous rooftop signature from yesterday. Something entirely different from anything I had scanned before. Something else. Something the system had no category for. Something that was sitting 3 tables away from me, eating a completely normal breakfast and reading a textbook. I looked over carefully. A girl, maybe 20, dark hair, unremarkable appearance, genuinely focused on the textbook. Nothing about her looked unusual, but the energy signature was wrong in a way that was hard to articulate. It wasn't hunter energy. That had a specific, structured quality to it. Energy? That had a specific, structured quality. It wasn't monster energy. That was rawer, more instinct-driven. This was something that sat in between, layered, like multiple energy types occupying the same space in a way that shouldn't be possible. The hunger skill ran its analysis and returned something I hadn't seen before, a result format that didn't match any previous acquisition attempt. Target identified, hybrid entity. Classification, mixed origin. Primary components, restricted. Rank assessment, above current analysis capability. Above current analysis capability at E rank. Whatever this girl was, the hunger skill at E rank couldn't fully read her, which meant she was either significantly above E rank in actual power, or she was something so unusual that the classification system didn't have a box for her. The hunger skill hadn't just detected them, it had responded to them, like recognizing something it was designed to eventually reach. F plus rank, the most powerful human alive, had just passed within range. The system logged it, noted the target, filed it as restricted, and waited. That was the thing about the hunger skill that I kept coming back to. It didn't have a maximum. It didn't have an upper limit printed in the description. The description said useless. The description was a lie. The question was how large a lie it was. I was about to find out more of the answer than I expected. On day 14, I was coming back through the maintenance tunnels toward the drainage grate near my apartment building. Standard route, familiar terrain. The system flagged a target 60 meters ahead before I reached the junction. E-rank creature, stationary, injured, based on the weakness in its energy signature. Easy, good. I needed one more significant absorption to hit the E-rank threshold. This was convenient timing. I came around the corner and stopped. It wasn't an E-rank creature. It had an E-rank energy reading because it was injured and bleeding out on the tunnel floor. But what it actually was, the system identified it after a second scan. Mid-rank dungeon beast, D-rank at full capacity, currently at approximately 20% operational strength, due to injuries that appeared to be from another fight. D-rank, not E, and not at full power, but D-rank at 20% was probably still capable of ending F+ rank very efficiently. I should have retreated. That was the objectively correct decision in that moment. The smart play was clear. I stood there anyway and looked at the beast. Instead, I stood there and thought about the E to D rank jump and what absorbing a D rank creature would add to my profile and how much faster the trajectory would accelerate if I could manage this. The beast opened its eyes, looked at me, large, roughly wolf-shaped but with layered bone plating across its spine and shoulders, eyes slow and calculating, plating along its spine and shoulders. Its eyes tracked me with the slow focus of something conserving energy. For 10 seconds, neither of us moved. Bone plating composition acquired. Preliminary scan only. Insufficient proximity for full absorption. First time the skill had done that. Bone plating composition acquired. Preliminary scan only. Insufficient proximity for full absorption. First time the skill had pre-scanned. Preliminary scan. The skill was scanning the beast from range, not absorbing, just reading, mapping what was there before I decided whether to attempt contact. I had not known it could do that. The beast was watching me process this. Something in its posture changed to not aggression, not submission, more like reassessment. D-rank predators were smart enough to read situations. It was injured. I was unknown. The calculation was complex. I took one step forward. The beast didn't move. Took another. Nothing. Absorption from an injured D-rank went differently than the tunnel creatures had. The process was slower, more layered, more deliberate. Absorption from an injured D-rank went differently than the tunnel creatures had. The process was slower, more layered, more thorough, more complex. The system worked through layers of capability rather than copying surface traits. It took longer. The result felt different, heavier. Bone plating integration, minor. Structural reinforcement added to skeletal and dermal layers. Resistance to blunt impact significantly increased. Pack predator positioning, acquired. Combat awareness expanded to include spatial tracking of multiple targets simultaneously. Automatic threat prioritization. D-rank endurance framework, partially acquired. Physical stamina reserves increased. Recovery rate between exertion cycles accelerated, and then the rank notification appeared. Rank threshold reached. Transitioning F+ to E rank. E rank. I sat in the tunnel with the data from my first D rank absorption settling into the system and felt the difference immediately. Everything that had been operating at F+ suddenly had more behind it. The speed felt like the difference between running and actually running. Real speed. Like the difference between running and actually running. The sensory range jumped again without me doing anything. The Hunger Skill's passive scan range extended to 90 meters. I could feel the entire block above me. The residence, E rank. From sewer rat to E rank in 14 days on the strength of a skill the system described as completely useless. That was something. I stood up in the tunnel and stretched and thought, okay, now we can start actually thinking about hunters. Not hiding from them. Thinking about them. I stood up in the tunnel and stretched and thought, okay, now we can start actually thinking about hunters. Not running from them. Thinking. The problem with thinking about hunters was the part where the hunters were currently thinking about ghouls with unusual energy patterns. I found out about the third SSS-Rank disappearance the same evening I hit E-rank. Coming up through the drainage grate, checking my phone, opening the news app out of habit. Park Jung-ho, gone. Yoon Sera, gone. And now, Choi Min-ho. SSS-Rank. Combat specialization, force amplification. Described as physically the strongest hunter currently active in the region. 3 SSS-Rank hunters. 3 disappearances, 0 evidence, 0 explanations. The guilds were no longer using the word crisis. They were using the word emergency. The emergency response included something that affected me directly, expanded low-rank ghoul clearance operations in urban underground areas. All major tunnel systems to be swept within 48 hours. My tunnel system, my hunting ground, my route between the drainage infrastructure and the apartment. I read that part twice, then closed the news app. Then sat on the edge of the drainage grate in the night air and thought through the timeline. 48 hours to clear my underground access routes, which meant I needed to either find new routes or eliminate my dependence on the tunnels significantly, or both. Probably both. The apartment was ground level access. I had the shadow concealment skill. I had E-rank physical capability now. I had emotional perception for early warning on approaching hunters. Moving through the city above ground at night was viable. Risky, but viable. And the tunnel dependence had always been a temporary situation born from rank necessity. E-rank didn't need to hide in sewers. E-rank could be selective about when and where it operated. E-rank was the beginning of actually having options. I stood up, dusted off, and walked back to the apartment through the streets for the first time above ground at night without hiding in tunnels. Shadow concealment at night made me effectively invisible to casual observation. The emotional perception gave me early warning on anyone paying active attention to their surroundings. I made it back without incident, went upstairs, sat at the desk, and opened a notebook I found in the apartment from my previous life and started writing. Not a diary, a strategic document. Current rank, current skills, current limitations, current targets of interest, current threats. The SSS-Rank disappearances were at the top of the threats column, not because I was connected to them, but because whatever was responsible for making 3 of the world's most powerful fighters vanish without evidence was operating in the same city I was trying to survive in. And whatever it was significantly above my current rank. At E-rank, I could feel SSS-level energy at range. I could not affect it. I could not compete with it. I could not absorb it without getting within proximity, which would require somehow neutralizing an SSS-rank fighter first. The math didn't work yet, but it would. The trajectory was clear. Every day, every absorption, every rank threshold cleared brought me closer to the point where the math started working. The question was how fast I could get there before whoever was removing SSS rank hunters made E-rank ghouls interesting enough to notice. University morning, 3rd week since the rebirth. Lee Jun's attendance record was acceptable. His grades were dropping slightly due to the 11-day gap, but nothing that triggered formal review. I sat in the back of a lecture hall, half listening to a class on economic theory and running the hunger skills passive scan over the entire campus. And then, at the edge of the scan range, 90 meters away, a signature that made everything else on the scan go suddenly quiet. And then, at the edge of the scan range, 90 meters away, a signature that made everything else on the scan go completely quiet. Rank A. Clear and unmistakable now that I understood what I was reading. A-rank energy was a different quality from everything below it, denser, more structured, more deliberately contained. The system processed the target analysis. Hunter rank A, Jang Wari. Primary skill, gravity manipulation. Class, field controller. Current status, active duty, guild affiliation, Iron Vanguard. Iron Vanguard, one of the 3 largest guilds in the country. I rank field controller on university campus during active duty hours. Not a coincidence, not a social visit. They were already expanding the investigation. The 3 SSS disappearances had pushed the guilds into deploying A-rank assets to civilian areas for surveillance and pattern mapping. I sat perfectly still in the lecture hall and let the shadow concealment become as passive as possible. No active output at all. Not actively hiding, that would create a signature of its own, just reducing output, becoming part of the background noise of the campus. Not actively hiding, that would create a signature of its own, just reducing output, becoming background noise in the room. University didn't start until 9. I had 3 hours. I used one of them to run the extended scan across the entire district from the apartment roof, mapping every energy signature within range. Students, faculty, 2 off-duty hunters at a breakfast place 2 blocks over. D-rank, not relevant. The Iron Vanguard monitoring device in the basement, and nothing else unusual. She wasn't in range. The second hour I spent thinking through everything she'd said. 6 words. You're scanning me. And then, the thing you're looking for isn't here. The thing you're looking for isn't in the university district. That was the complete inventory of information she'd provided. She could feel the hunger skill operating at range. That meant she had either very high sensitivity to energy emissions, or she was familiar specifically with this type of skill. Both implications were significant, and neither was comfortable to sit with. She hadn't alarmed, hadn't called the guild line, hadn't treated the detection of a ghoul's scanning ability as an emergency, which meant she either didn't classify me as a threat, or she had reasons not to involve the guilds with what she knew about me. The second option interested me more. People who avoid involving the guilds usually have their own reasons for staying off guild radar, which meant she might have as much to lose from official attention as I did. That changed things considerably. That changed the dynamic. If she wasn't going to report me, she wanted something from the interaction. The cryptic direction toward the industrial port district was either a test, a warning, or an invitation. I'd treated it as information and gone to verify, found the massive unknown entity beneath the old port infrastructure. The system had declined to analyze it fully. Do not approach had appeared once and then gone silent. That had never happened with any previous target. Whatever was down there, it was connected to the SSS disappearances. The system had confirmed that directly. This is where the SSS hunters came. Target profile acquisition, pending sufficient host rank. Pending sufficient host rank. That meant the entity could be absorbed eventually, when I was strong enough, which meant it was on the trajectory, just far ahead of where I currently sat. The third hour I spent on the roof watching the city wake up and running the math. Current rank, E target to make B rank approach viable, at minimum high D rank, probably D+, maybe C rank to be safe. The gap from E to D rank required significant absorptions. Not tunnel rats and shadow parasites, something with actual density. Hunter-level energy, or D-rank dungeon creatures at minimum. D-rank dungeon creatures mostly existed inside active dungeons. The portal spaces that guilds controlled and monetized. Getting inside a guild-operated dungeon as an unregistered ghoul was not simple, but I had something the dungeon runners didn't plan for. I could detect energy signatures at 90 meters and suppress my own output to near zero. I could move through shadows effectively. I could suppress my own energy output to near baseline human levels. The guild monitoring network was designed to catch things that radiated power openly. It wasn't calibrated for a ghoul that had learned to run quiet from the first day in the sewer. I went to class. The lecture was on something economic that I processed at about 15% of my actual attention. The rest was running the scan across the lecture hall, mapping everyone, cataloging signatures. 73 students in the room, 69 humans with no awakened ability. 3 F-rank awakened, who probably didn't know yet. The kind of latent potential that hadn't triggered consciously. And one person in the second row with a signature I recognized. Kim Ta-yang, B rank, Iron Vanguard, in my economics lecture. Not a coincidence. He sat in the second row with a notebook and a pen and the practiced expression of someone who was definitely not actually taking notes on macroeconomic policy. The emotional perception read his state clearly. Alert, controlled, performing casual very deliberately. He was working. I was in the back row. He hadn't looked at me yet. Hadn't reacted to my presence. Either he didn't know I was here specifically, or he was better at not reacting than I was at reading him. I kept the energy suppression at maximum and took actual notes on the lecture content just to have something to look at. Lee Jun, the student. Completely normal. Nothing unusual. Please ignore. The lecture ended. Students filed out. I waited until I was third to last and moved toward the door at student pace. Normal. Unremarkable. Background. Kim Ta-yang stood up at the same time I reached the aisle. We were 4 feet apart for approximately 2 seconds, as the remaining students created a minor bottleneck at the door. The hunger skill did the preliminary scan automatically, building the profile, mapping the skill structure at close range. The additional detail from proximity was significant. Body enhancement had layers I hadn't seen from 40 meters. Primary layer, raw physical amplification, strength, speed, durability multiplied during activation. Secondary, something more interesting. Secondary layer, something the system labeled adaptive response. The enhancement automatically calibrated to the specific type of incoming threat. Adaptive response. That meant hitting Kim Ta-yang wouldn't just be hitting someone strong, it would be hitting someone whose body was actively adjusting to the exact type of hit I was attempting. Every attack would be slightly less effective than the last one. That was a genuinely clever ability, also a genuinely annoying one for anyone trying to fight him. I filed the information and kept walking. He didn't follow me out. I checked twice with the scan from the corridor. He stayed behind, probably to check something in the lecture hall, probably related to why he was actually there. Outside, I found a bench in the courtyard and sat facing the building entrance. If he was here for me specifically, he'd come looking. If he was running a grid sweep, he'd exit and move to the next location. He came out 8 minutes later and walked northwest. Not toward me, not pausing to scan, moving with a deliberate pace of someone covering a search pattern. Grid sweep. Not here for me personally. The Iron Vanguard was being thorough. A-rank deployments, B-rank monitoring, sensor networks in residential buildings. 3 missing SSS-Rank hunters had pushed the most powerful guild in the region to running maximum coverage indefinitely. That was going to be my operating environment for the foreseeable future. Maximum coverage from a guild that had the resources to sustain it indefinitely. I needed to accelerate the rank growth before they calibrated their detection threshold low enough to register E-rank anomalies in civilian areas. She appeared at 11:17. I know the exact time because I'd been watching the courtyard entrance for 2 hours and tracking everything on a mental timeline for something to do. Same dark hair, same ordinary appearance, same completely wrong energy signature underneath the surface. She sat down on the bench next to mine with a coffee cup and a book and said nothing for 3 minutes. The hunger skill was running full analysis. The result was identical to before. Mixed origin entity, above current analysis capability. Above current analysis capability, reading as simultaneously human and not, like 2 things occupying the same coordinates. I spoke first. You knew I was going to be on that bench. She turned a page. You've been sitting there for 2 hours. It wasn't difficult to plan around. The emotional perception was picking up something from her that was difficult to categorize cleanly. Not calm, exactly. Not tension, either. More like settled. The specific emotional state of someone who has made a decision and fully stopped second-guessing it. Committed. "What are you?" I asked. Direct. No point in building up to it after she'd already demonstrated she could feel my scanning ability and hadn't reported it. She looked up from the book. The energy signature shifted slightly. Not threatening. More like something coming into focus. "A collector," she said. "Like you, just further along." Collector? The word landed with weight, not a random descriptor. A self-identification that implied she understood exactly what the hunger skill did, which implied she either had the same absorption mechanism or had spent extensive time studying this specific skill type. I said, "You absorb things." "I used to." She closed the book. "Now I mostly maintain what I've collected. The absorption phase ends eventually. You reach a point where what you have is more useful than what you could add." She looked at me steadily. "You're nowhere near that point." That was not reassuring in any way, but it was information. I asked, "How long did your absorption phase take before you reached the maintenance stage?" "Longer than it's going to take you," she said. "Your skill is different from mine. Mine was slower at the start, more selective. Yours is..." She paused, seemingly choosing words. "Yours is hungry in a way mine wasn't. It wants to scale. Mine wanted to refine." I thought about that. The hunger skill had shown me its nature in pieces over 16 days. It didn't discriminate between targets, rat, slug, parasite, beast. Everything was absorbable. Everything left something behind. "The entity under the port," I said. Not a question, testing what she knew. She didn't react with surprise. That told me everything. "You found it fast," she said. "I expected it to take you another week, at least. The scan range at E rank shouldn't reach that deep." "The void feeder absorption increased my scan sensitivity," I said. 40% range increase. It reached the port district from the university area. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise, exactly. More like recalibration. Like she'd been working from a model of my capabilities, and I'd just given her new data that required adjustment. "You absorbed a void feeder at E-rank threshold," she said slowly. "Mid-E-rank void feeder, judging by the scan sensitivity increase you're describing." "The scan sensitivity increase you're describing. Those aren't easy to find. They hunt other dungeon monsters." "Found one in the maintenance tunnels near the old drainage infrastructure. It was hunting tunnel crawlers." I watched her expression. "What is the thing under the port?" She was quiet for a long moment. The settled emotional state I'd been reading shifted slightly. Something that might have been reluctance, or might have been calculation about how much to share. "It's called a root," she finally said. Not a name it chose, a classification. Something that grows beneath the city for a long time, feeding on the ambient energy of the population above it until it becomes old enough to think. A root. I processed that. "It's been under the port for how long?" "At least 40 years, she said. "Possibly longer. It was small enough to be undetectable when it established. By the time it was large enough to register on guild detection equipment, it had learned to suppress its signature below their threshold. 40 years old. Feeding on the city above it, learning to hide. That explained why the guild's sweeps hadn't found it. It had been hiding longer than modern guild detection equipment had existed. "The SSS hunters," I said. "They found it. They found the edge of its suppression field," she said. "Which is different. The root doesn't kill, it collects. SSS-Rank energy signatures are extremely attractive to something that feeds on ambient power. When an SSS gets close enough..." She made a small gesture that finished the sentence without words. "Collected. Not killed." The 3 SSS hunters weren't dead. They were inside the root, somewhere beneath 60 meters of old port infrastructure, being held by something ancient and patient and very, very large. "The guilds don't know," I said. "The guilds think it's a hostile entity responsible for 3 murders," she said, which is incorrect. But correcting their understanding would require explaining how I know, which requires explaining what I am, which is a conversation I've been avoiding for several years. She'd been in this city, knowing about the root, avoiding guild detection for years, which meant her ability to suppress her own signature was significantly more developed than mine. "Why are you telling me?" I asked. She picked up her coffee. "Because you're going to try to absorb it anyway," she said. "And if you try at your current rank, it absorbs you instead. I've watched 3 SSS-Rank hunters disappear into it in the past 2 weeks. I don't want to watch you disappear too." That was either genuine concern or a very sophisticated control mechanism. I couldn't tell which from the emotional red. The settled quality of her state didn't shift in either direction. "What rank do I need to be to approach it safely?" I asked. She was quiet long enough that I started counting the seconds. "I don't know," she said honestly. I'm not a hunger type. My collection worked differently. What I can tell you is that the SSS hunters who disappeared were at the peak of human capacity, and they weren't enough. She met my eyes. That should tell you something about the scale of what's down there. Above SSS-Rank. The root was operating at a level above the ceiling of the human awakening system. That was what the system's do not approach had meant. Not just that I was too weak currently, but that the gap was genuinely extreme. Then I need to grow fast, I said. Yes, she agreed, which is why I'm here. She reached into her bag and set a folded piece of paper on the bench between us. There's a C-rank dungeon that the Jade Spire Guild manages on the eastern edge of the city. They run tours for B-rank hunters doing skill development exercises. The schedule is on that paper. I looked at the paper on the bench without picking it up yet. You want me to raid a guild-operated dungeon, I said. I want you to absorb what's in it, she said. There are 4 C-rank creatures in that dungeon that the guild has been using for training exercises for 2 years. Well-documented, predictable behavior, limited mobility range. The kind of targets that would push you from E rank to solid D rank in one night. One night in a controlled dungeon environment versus weeks of hunting and tunnel infrastructure, hoping to find D rank creatures accidentally. The math was not subtle. And the risk? I asked. Jade Spire runs minimal security on training dungeons, she said. Their assumption is nothing gets in that can't handle what's inside. Their logic is that nothing outside goes in unless it's trying to challenge their monsters, and nothing inside comes out unless it defeats their monsters. They don't account for something that can move quiet and suppress its signature. She paused. Also, I'll be outside monitoring the guild patrol patterns and signaling you if the rotation changes. She was offering field support, which meant she had a stake in this succeeding, which meant she wanted something from my progression that was specific enough to invest resources in. What do you get from this? I asked directly. The question had been waiting since she sat down. I wasn't going to skip it. She was quiet for a moment. The emotional ridge showed something complicated moving beneath the settled surface. Not deception, more like something she was deciding whether to share. The root has been growing for 40 years, she said. Eventually it will be large enough that suppressing its signature becomes difficult. When that happens, the guilds will find it, and their response will be a maximum force elimination operation that destroys the port district. And everything in it. She looked toward the direction of the old industrial area, including 3 SSS-Rank hunters who aren't dead yet. She wanted to extract the SS hunters from the root. That required someone strong enough to interact with the root non-lethally. Someone with an absorption-type ability that could potentially negotiate the exchange rather than fighting. You think I can get them out? I said. I think you might be the only type of ability that could, she said. Eventually, if you grow fast enough before the guilds find the root. She stood up. The dungeon schedule is on the paper. I'll be on the water tower 2 blocks east of the Jade Spire facility from 8 p.m. Signal if you need an exit route. She walked away. I sat there watching the empty space where she'd been and turned over everything she'd said about 6 times in rapid succession. The hunger skills analysis was still running in the background. The data collected from her proximity was richer than anything else I'd accumulated. Mixed origin. Layered in a way that implied years of accumulation rather than weeks. Something built deliberately over a long time. She was ahead of me, significantly. And she was choosing to help me close the gap. Either because she genuinely needed what only my specific skill type could eventually provide, or because she had a longer plan that required me to be stronger than I currently was. Both options meant I needed to get stronger anyway. So, I picked up the paper, unfolded it, read the Jade Spire dungeon schedule. Training runs at 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. Night maintenance window from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. Skeleton crew of 2 B-rank monitors during that window. Tonight, 2 a.m. I had 13 hours. I spent 5 of them at university doing the Lee June thing. Classes, library, the cafeteria, campus existence. The monitoring device in the building was still registering me as normal background. The Iron Vanguard grid sweep continued in the surrounding blocks, never quite touching the university core. Kim Taeyang appeared at the library in the afternoon. He sat 2 tables away from me and read something on his phone with that same practiced expression. His phone with the same practiced casual expression from the morning lecture. Still grid sweeping, still not registering me as significant. I read a textbook and ran the hunger skills preliminary scan on him continuously for an hour, building the most complete profile of his body enhancement ability that my current rank could produce. Adaptive response, stamina framework, recovery acceleration, all logged. At 6 p.m., I went back to the apartment and ate. The hunger management had developed a pattern over the past week. There were small F-rank creatures that existed in the building's wall spaces, drawn by the city's ambient heat. Not ideal, but consistent. The emotional perception picked up a strong signal from the neighbor 2 floors up. Anxiety, the sharp kind. I checked the news on my phone. The guild emergency protocols had been upgraded. SSS disappearances now categorized as a hostile action by an unknown top-tier entity. All hunters rank C and above recalled to duty. Recalled to duty. That meant the casual grid searches were ending and actual mobilization was beginning. The Iron Vanguard was going to war footing over 3 missing members. This accelerated my timeline significantly. If the guilds went to full mobilization, the city would be covered at a density I couldn't move through as easily as I'd been managing. Every block, every sector, constant overlapping sweeps at all rank levels. I needed the Jade Spire dungeon tonight. I needed to not be visible while it happened. Both requirements had to be met simultaneously. At 11 p.m., I left the apartment. Not through the door, through the window, 2nd floor. The shadow concealment active at full passive. The scan running ahead of my movement. The eastern edge of the city was 30 minutes at normal pace. I covered it in 18 by taking the most direct route through the quieter residential streets and using the concealment continuously. The Jade Spire facility was a converted commercial building. The guild had bought a warehouse 6 years ago and retrofitted it for dungeon management. The portal seal was visible from outside if you knew what you were looking for. A slight shimmer in the air at the roofline. I found the water tower 2 blocks east, looked up. She was there, a shadow in a specific configuration that said someone was crouched at the tower's base platform. The emotional perception confirmed it, that same settled, decided quality that was her baseline, no signal from her, which meant the patrol rotation was still on schedule. 2 B-rank monitors, grid pattern, shift change had already happened at midnight according to the schedule. Next rotation window, 3 hours. I approached the facility from the west face. No windows on that side, warehouse design, solid wall, 1 service door with a basic electronic lock that wasn't designed to stop anyone who could actually threaten the dungeon inside. The lock was designed to stop unauthorized humans from wandering into an active dungeon by accident. I was not that threat profile. A ghoul with E-rank physical capacity, echolocation, and 16 days of adaptive survival instinct was not the threat profile it was built for. I was inside in 40 seconds. The dungeon interior was a created space, a portal-generated environment that existed physically inside the building, but spatially extended well beyond its walls. Standard guild dungeon setup. The air felt different the moment I crossed the threshold. Denser, charged, with the specific quality of a space that had been shaped by portal energy. The hunger skill lit up immediately. 4 distinct signatures, all C-rank. All stationary. Sleeping or resting, the behavioral pattern of dungeon creatures in their off-cycle. I moved toward the nearest signature. The concealment was fully active. My footsteps were calibrated to the floor texture. Echolocation mapped the space ahead without me needing to see it. The first creature was a stone sentinel. Bipedal, 3 meters tall, body composition, roughly 60% compressed mineral, 40% organic tissue. The guild used them for impact resistance training. They were slow, heavily armored, and hit like a building falling over. C-rank, significantly above anything I'd absorbed before. The hunger skill ran the preliminary scan and returned a longer list than usual. Stone sentinel, C-rank, primary composition, mineral integration, organic tissue bonded with geological material at the cellular level. Secondary, seismic sense, vibration detection in a 20-meter radius. Tertiary, regenerative density, damage repair through mineral absorption from environment. 3 separate ability components. A C-rank creature wasn't just stronger than D-rank, it was categorically more complex, more layers, more integration between systems. The absorption process with something this size and density was going to be different from anything I'd managed before. The D-rank beast had taken longer, this would take longer still. I waited until the stone sentinel's breathing pattern indicated its deepest rest cycle. Then I made contact and let the skill begin. The absorption started slowly. The hunger skill engaged the stone sentinel's energy at the surface level first. Not aggressive, more like establishing a connection. A handshake in whatever language the hunger skill operated in when it interfaced with a target this large. The sentinel didn't wake up. The process was quiet enough at the early stages that the seismic sense didn't register it as a disturbance. I kept my movement to 0 and let the skill work. Mineral integration, transferring. Seismic sense, transferring. Regenerative density, transferring. The process moved through each layer in sequence, methodical, thorough, unhurried. 40 minutes later, the stone sentinel was gone, and I was sitting on the dungeon floor with my hands flat on the ground, feeling the vibrations of the city above through a sense that hadn't existed an hour ago. The seismic input was extraordinarily detailed. Seismic sense. I could feel the water tower 2 blocks away. Could distinguish the weight of someone crouching at its base from the background vibration of the structure. She was still there. The rank readout had shifted. E rank to E+, not the full jump I'd hoped for. A C rank single absorption wasn't enough, but the skill density was significantly higher than anything I'd accumulated before. 3 more creatures in the dungeon. I stood up and moved toward the second signature without taking more than 30 seconds to recover. The second was a void crawler, an arachnid-type creature, 8-limbed, roughly 2 meters across, with the ability to generate localized distortion fields that disrupted spatial perception. Guild used it for disorientation training, teaching hunters to fight when their sense of direction was unreliable. C rank, different skill profile from the Sentinel. Void crawler, primary, spatial distortion, generates fields that disrupt directional sense. Secondary, silk anchoring, high tensile webbing that binds targets. Tertiary, phase sensitivity, passive detection of spatial irregularities, including portal edges and skill boundaries. Phase sensitivity. That last one caught my attention. Passive detection of skill boundaries, including things like my shadow concealment's edge. If I'd encountered a void crawler while using the concealment, it would have immediately detected the skill boundary around me. That was a significant gap in my existing toolkit that I hadn't known existed. Absorbing phase. Sensitivity meant I'd have it. Turned inward, it would let me detect other skills' operational boundaries from outside, which meant I could feel the edge of another entity's active ability from a distance without them knowing I was mapping it. The second absorption took 35 minutes. Void crawler processed differently from the Stone Sentinel. More diffuse, less structured, the skill components more interwoven than layered. My rank shifted again. E+ moving solidly toward the D rank threshold. 2 more creatures. The third was a flame drake, serpentine, 6 meters of high temperature combustion ability wrapped in scale plating that had been heat hardened over the drake's lifetime. Guild used it for fire resistance training. Flame drake, primary, combustion core, internal heat generation exceeding most material tolerances. Secondary, scale hardening, progressive thermal conditioning of surface armor. Tertiary, heat reading, thermal signature detection at range, distinguishing living targets from environment. Heat reading. Every living body emitted a thermal signature. The flame drake could track targets through walls by their heat output. Another layer of environmental awareness that my current set didn't have. Third absorption, 42 minutes. The combustion process was the most complex so far, integrating fire-type energy with a body composition that already included mineral components from the Sentinel created some interesting interactions inside the system. The rank notification appeared. D rank threshold reached, transitioning E+ to D rank, in one night. 4 weeks earlier, I'd been F+ eating rats in a sewer and thinking E rank was the medium-term goal. The system's passive scan extended again, 130 meters. The sensitivity upgrade was immediately obvious and disorienting. I could now distinguish between active and dormant skill states and targets, not just detect energy signatures. The fourth creature was the one that made me stop moving for 30 seconds when I first registered its signature clearly. It wasn't a dungeon creature at all. The signature was wrong for the environment. Too deliberate, too contained, with the specific structured quality of an awakened human ability rather than anything native to the dungeon environment. A person. I scanned it again. The result was the same. Awakened human. D rank. Emotional perception picked up the signature of someone in a very light sleep. The kind of sleep that came from being trained to wake at the slightest disturbance. Not a creature, a person, sleeping in the dungeon's 4th chamber. One of the B rank monitors. Apparently the schedule had a detail the paper hadn't mentioned. One of the 2 monitors slept inside the dungeon during the maintenance window instead of outside. I was standing in a dungeon with a sleeping D rank hunter 20 meters away. The absorption process had taken 2 hours and 17 minutes so far. The patrol rotation outside ran for 3 hours total, 43 minutes remaining in the window. Not much margin. Leaving now was the smart choice. 3 C-rank absorptions and a D-rank transition in one night was already beyond what I'd planned. The mission was successful. The rational move was exit immediately. The hunger skill had other opinions. The preliminary scan on the sleeping hunter was already running. D-rank, awakened human. Primary skill, perception. Expansion, heightened awareness of environment and active use. Secondary, something the system listed as partially obscured at my current reading range. A partially obscured secondary skill. That meant something I couldn't fully read, which meant it was either above my current analysis capability, or it was a skill type the system didn't have a clean category for. I stood in the dark dungeon and had a 30-second argument with myself about this. On one side, sleeping hunter, unknown secondary skill, risk of detection, time pressure, successful mission already complete, exit now. On the other side, D-rank human absorption would be the first of its kind. The skill had never absorbed a human target. I didn't know what that would produce. I didn't know if human absorption worked the same way as creature absorption. I didn't know what the partially obscured secondary skill was or what it would add to my composite. The argument was not actually close. I crossed the chamber. Human absorption was different, immediately obviously, entirely different from every creature absorption I'd done before. It wasn't just skill transfer, it was more. The hunger skill interfaced with the sleeping hunter's ability in a way that felt like reading rather than copying. Like the skill was parsing not just the technical structure of the ability, but the lived experience of using it. The hunter's name was Seo Minky, D rank, 3 years active. Joined Jade Spire at D rank threshold and had been developing steadily since. His perception expansion had been built through hundreds of dungeon runs, calibrated through experience, layered with practical applications that the raw ability description didn't capture. The secondary skill resolved as the absorption progressed. The system had labeled it partially obscured because it was still developing, an emerging third skill that hadn't fully formed yet. The hunter was in the process of developing something new, an ability still forming, and it existed in an unfinished, incomplete state. The skill information was labeled threat mapping, the ability to build and maintain an internal model of a combat environment, tracking multiple targets' positions and projected movements simultaneously. Incomplete, but transferring. The hunger skill absorbed the partial development along with every other layer, the unfinished included. SEO Minky didn't wake up. The absorption took 18 minutes and left him intact. No physical change, no missing capabilities. I hadn't taken anything from him, I'd copied it. That was the distinction I'd understood intellectually and now understood experientially. The hunger skill didn't remove what it absorbed, it duplicated. The hunter still had perception expansion, still had the emerging threat mapping, still had everything he'd built over 3 years. I had copies, partial and imperfect and filtered through whatever the hunger skill's translation process did to human abilities, but copies. I was also standing in the dark dungeon with a timer ticking down, now experiencing something I hadn't anticipated. The copied perception expansion had activated on acquisition, and perception expansion at a D-rank hunter's calibration level was very, very different from what my existing sensory abilities had been providing. It was like someone had upgraded every input channel simultaneously. The seismic sense I'd gotten from the Sentinel went from feeling vibrations to reading them like text. The heat reading from the Drake went from thermal awareness to detailed thermal mapping. The phase. Sensitivity from the Void Crawler went from edge detection to full skill boundary visualization in real space. And the emotional perception, which had been a useful background tool since the Shadow Parasite, became something else entirely, something that felt less like sensing and more like understanding. I could feel Seo Minky sleeping. Not just that he was sleeping, not just the emotional texture of his rest state. I could feel the shape of his awareness even in sleep. The patterns of a trained hunter's unconscious monitoring, cycling through environmental checks even in deep rest. The patrol rotation outside shifted. The seismic sense felt it before the timer in my head reached 0. One of the exterior monitors had changed course. New pattern. The rotation had shifted. I moved, not running. Running created vibration and heat signature and noise. Moving at the careful, calibrated pace the collected instincts of 26 absorptions had built into my movement baseline. Out of the 4th chamber, back through the 3rd. Past the empty space where the flame drake had been, moving quietly at calibrated pace, through the 2nd chamber, past the void crawler's absence, through the 1st chamber's cool, mineral-scented air, toward the service door. The phase. Sensitivity picked up a skill activation on the other side of the door. Whoever was on the other side had something active. Not a weapon, not an offensive ability. A detection skill. The monitor was standing directly on the other side of the door with a detection ability running. 30 centimeters of reinforced door between me and a B-rank hunter who had an active detection skill running. I stayed completely still. The shadow concealment would help if I were already in the open. It wouldn't help with a detection skill that was specifically looking for anomalies in a space the hunter was actively scanning. I stood very still and thought about what I had available. 17 skills in total now, across 4 weeks of absorptions. The question was, which combination addressed this specific situation? Phase sensitivity. Let me feel the edges of the detection skill's operational radius through the door material. 15 meters. Arc pattern. It extended about 15 meters in an arc, a scan rather than an omnidirectional field, meaning it had gaps. Seismic sense. The monitor was standing still, not moving in a pattern, waiting, either for a partner to report in or waiting for something specific to trigger the detection scan they were running. Heat reading. The thermal signature through the door showed one person, no second signature nearby. The exterior patrol was operating without immediate partner backup at this side of the building, one person. Active detection skill. 15-meter scan arc, stationary. The detection skill had a specific orientation. Phase sensitivity. Let me feel that orientation through the door. The scan was pointing toward the dungeon interior. toward where the creatures should be. The monitor was checking on the dungeon's inhabitants, not scanning for exterior threats. Which meant if I exited through the service door while the scan was oriented inward, I would be behind the detection arc. Not invisible, but not within the scan's active coverage. I waited. The seismic sense tracked the monitor's stillness. The phase sensitivity tracked the detection skill's arc orientation. I needed the exact moment the scan was pointed maximally inward. There. The arc shifted another 15 degrees into the dungeon. I pushed the door open at exactly the speed that produced no detectable vibration, stepped through, let it close behind me with equally zero vibration, and was outside in the night air with a B-rank hunter's active detection skill 6 meters away, pointed in the opposite direction. Shadow concealment, full passive. Heat signature, suppressed as much as the Drake's ability allowed from inside. I couldn't eliminate my thermal signature, but I could reduce it to background level. The monitor's heat reading would see the rough outline of a person-sized warm object, but no awakened energy signature, no skill radiation, nothing that didn't also describe a large warm animal or a piece of running equipment. I walked away from the Jade Spire facility at measured pace. 1 block, 2 blocks. The water tower. She was still there. The seismic sense felt her shift position as I approached. The emotional perception picked up. Surprise, and underneath it, something warmer. Relief. I stopped below the tower. It went well, I said quietly. You were in there for 2 hours and 40 minutes, she said from above. The rotation changed at the 2-hour mark. I thought you were caught. There was an unexpected variable, I said. The schedule didn't mention an interior monitor. Silence for 3 seconds. There was a sleeping hunter inside the dungeon. D-rank, I said. I addressed it. Another silence. Longer. The emotional perception was reading something that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite concern and wasn't quite fascination, but contained elements of all three. You absorbed a sleeping hunter, she said. Not a question. Without waking him. Without removing anything, I said. He still has everything he had before. I have copies. The silence after that one lasted longer still. That's not supposed to be possible, she finally said. Absorption-type skills don't copy. They take. The source loses what the absorber gains. That's the mechanism. That's how every absorption ability I've ever encountered has functioned. Mine doesn't take, I said. It copies. I understood the difference intellectually after the first few absorptions. Tonight I understood it experientially. She climbed down from the water tower platform. Standing in front of me in the night air, the perception expansion let me read her emotional state in detail I hadn't had before. The settled quality was still there. But underneath it was something moving quickly. Calculation, reassessment, the specific texture of someone updating a model that had just proven insufficient. If your skill copies rather than takes, she said carefully, then absorbing the root doesn't have to be permanent. You could absorb its structure, understand it, interact with it, without it losing the capability to release the hunters it's holding. That's what you were hoping, I said. That's why you've been tracking absorption-type skills, looking for one that copies rather than takes. For 4 years, she said. There were 6 hunger-type awakened I identified over that period. All of them took. None of them copied. She looked at me steadily. You're different, and I don't know why yet. I didn't know either. The hunger skill had been called useless in its system description. F rank, the worst possible rating. Maybe the description was wrong because the system had never seen a copying absorption before and had no category for it. Maybe the worst described skill was worst described precisely because the system had never encountered a copying absorption. No category existed. The rank display in my system interface showed D rank. Skills. 32 components across 26 source absorptions. Scan range, 130 meters. 1 month ago, I was a 23-year-old student who couldn't light a candle. Tonight, I had absorbed 4 dungeon creatures and a hunter. Dungeon creatures and a hunter, without leaving a mark, evaded a B-rank detection ability at 6-meter range and reached D rank. What's your name? I asked. It seemed like something I should know at this point. Hot Yunbi, she said. I've been in the city for 4 years. I know every guild patrol route, every sensor network node, every awakened individual with significant energy in a 5-kilometer radius. She paused. Now I also know you, which changes the plan considerably. The plan. She'd had one before tonight. My copying ability had changed it. I wanted to know how. But it was 3 a.m. and the exterior patrol was still running a modified rotation and standing next to a water tower, having a conversation about absorption mechanics was not invisible behavior. Tomorrow, I said. She nodded. University cafeteria, 8 a.m. Bring your appetite. A small, brief, actual smile. Then she walked away into the dark with the specific confidence of someone who had spent 4 years moving through the city without leaving a trace behind her. I went home through the back route. scaled the building exterior to avoid the lobby monitor, came in through the window, sat on the floor in the dark, and ran the full system assessment. D rank, 32 skills, 4 weeks from waking up in a sewer with nothing but a rat and a skill the system called useless. The route, under the port, had taken 3 SSS-Rank hunters and was still growing. The guilds were mobilizing at maximum capacity, looking for a threat they had completely wrong. Ha Yunbi had been waiting 4 full years for an absorption ability that copied rather than took. Tonight she'd found it, found me, and I had a meeting at 8 a.m. to find out what that changed. I lay back and looked at the ceiling and thought, this is what Act 2 looks like. Drop a comment if you figured out why Ha Yunbi's been in this city for 4 years before she found me. The answer is already in the story. 8 a.m. University cafeteria. I was there at 7:50 because 4 weeks of ghoul survival instinct had permanently eliminated my ability to be late to anything that mattered. Ha Yunbi arrived at exactly 8. No coffee this time. Just sat down across from me and put a small device on the table between us. It looked like a USB drive, but the energy signature was wrong. Signal suppressor, she said. Guild monitoring equipment uses a specific frequency band. This blocks the band within a 4-meter radius. We can talk without the building sensor logging the conversation. I looked at it, then at her. Then I said, you carry signal suppression equipment, casually, in a university cafeteria. 4 years of practice, she said. You develop tools. She set her bag on the chair beside her. Last night went better than I expected. The D-rank transition happened faster than my projections. Your projections, I said. You were modeling my growth rate. She didn't apologize for it, just confirmed it directly. From the moment I identified your skill type in the cafeteria, she said without apology, absorption abilities have predictable scaling curves based on target quality and frequency. Yours is running faster than any curve I've modeled. The copying mechanism changes the math in ways I haven't fully mapped yet. The copying mechanism. She kept coming back to it. I understood why now. If standard absorption took from the source, then every hunter absorbed was a hunter weakened. Every powerful target consumed meant one fewer powerful ally remaining in the field. The strategic calculus was purely zero-sum. Copying changed that. Absorbing Kim Taeyang's body enhancement, if I could do it cleanly enough, would leave Kim Taeyang with full body enhancement. And give me a working copy of it without reducing his capability at all. That wasn't zero-sum. That was something else entirely. What's the plan? I said. She pulled a folded map from her bag. City map, printed on paper rather than digital. Paper didn't generate signals. She'd marked 3 locations in red and 1 in blue. The 3 red marks are Iron Vanguard sensor nodes, she said. Primary monitoring network for the university district and the surrounding residential area. The blue mark is a 4th node that went active 48 hours ago. New installation. They're expanding the network in response to the SSS disappearances. I looked at the map. The new node was 2 blocks from my apartment building. The existing sensor in my building was already inside the old network. The new node would create overlapping coverage that made the suppression trick I'd been running significantly harder. They're closing the grid, I said. Within a week, she said, the university district will have complete coverage at sensitivity levels that register E-rank anomalies. Right now, you read as background noise. In 7 days, you won't. I thought about that timeline. D-rank now. The rank jump last night had shifted my energy signature higher. More complex, more structured, more visible to anything calibrated for detection. D-rank in a district that would have E-rank sensitivity in 7 days. The gap was smaller than it sounded. What's the threshold for the new sensor configuration? I asked. She pulled out a second paper. She'd done research on Jade Spire's monitoring technology. The same type Iron Vanguard used, apparently. The technical specifications were printed in a font small enough to suggest she'd translated them from somewhere official. The new configuration detects any non-human energy signature above F rank within the coverage zone, she read from the printed specs. Cross-referenced against registered awakened individuals in the district database, unregistered signatures above F rank trigger an alert. Unregistered. I was not in any guild database. I was not a registered awakened. I was a ghoul operating under a human student identity with no official awakened status anywhere. When the new node came online, every time I used any skill in the coverage zone, I would trigger an alert. Shadow concealment. Hunger passive scan, seismic sense, emotional perception. All of them registered as non-human awakened energy above F rank. Living in that apartment was going to become impossible within a week. Options, I said. She had a list ready. She'd prepared for this meeting. 3 options, written in the same small, precise handwriting as the technical specifications. Option 1, relocate outside the sensor grid. The coverage zone had gaps. The industrial district to the east wasn't covered. I could establish a base there. Problem, the industrial district was close to the route's location. High ambient energy from the root suppressed smaller signals, which was useful for concealment, but proximity to something the system had told me not to approach at D rank was a variable I didn't want to manage while also managing everything else. Option 2, get registered. There were pathways for civilian awakened to register outside guild affiliation, independent status, no guild loyalty obligations, just an official record of existence in the system that stopped sensor alerts from triggering on my signature. Problem: registration required a public demonstration of abilities at a testing center. Any testing center would have guild observers. Any guild observer watching me demonstrate skills would see a composite signature that didn't match any known awakened type. Questions would follow. Option 3. Accelerate the rank progression past the point where the sensor configuration could hold me as a viable target. She tapped the third option when I looked at the list. This is the one, she said. The Iron Vanguard's sensor network is calibrated for up to A rank detection. Anything above A rank in terms of energy complexity defeats the detection algorithm. Too many overlapping signatures to cleanly identify as a threat. They get flagged as environmental anomalies. A rank energy complexity, I said. I'm currently at D rank. The gap between those 2 points is not subtle or easily abstract away. You were at F plus 5 weeks ago, she said. Fair point. The trajectory was not gradual. The trajectory was exponential in a way that even I hadn't fully processed until she put it in those terms. What's between D rank and A rank energy complexity in terms of the absorptions I'd need to get there? I asked directly. That depends entirely on what you absorb, she said. C rank creature absorptions add skill components. B rank human absorptions add human type complexity. The adaptive layers, the trained applications, the lived experience integration that makes human skills different from creature abilities in structural terms. A-rank absorptions would add the kind of density that starts approaching the detection threshold ceiling. You want me to absorb A-rank hunters? I said. I want you to absorb their skills without them knowing, she said carefully. The same way you absorbed Seo Minky last night. Copy, not take. They keep everything. You gain the component. A sleeping B-rank hunter in an unsecured dungeon was manageable. An A-rank hunter, active duty, Iron Vanguard, maximum alert deployment, in the middle of a maximum alert investigation of missing colleagues, was a substantially different category of problem. The gap in my physical capability was real. D rank against A rank in any kind of direct confrontation was not a scenario I survived. The adaptive response component I'd copied from Kim Tae-yang's profile was useful context, but not protection. I need to approach them without triggering a confrontation, I said. She nodded, which requires knowing their routines well enough to find the overlap window. She pushed the map toward me. The A-rank operative currently running the campus grid sweep, Jong Woo-ri, follows a patrol pattern with a 20-minute rest cycle built in. 12 p.m. every day, the courtyard behind the science building. Alone, I said. Alone, she confirmed. Gravity manipulation specialists avoid close quarters during rest periods. The skill requires concentration to maintain at precise levels, and proximity to other strongly awakened individuals disrupts the precision calibration she needs. Standard documented practice for gravity types. She knew Jang Wori's habits. She'd been observing Iron Vanguard operatives in this district for a while. 4 years of watching the guild presence in this city had built her a detailed operational picture. And she was sharing it with me, which meant the timeline she was working against had compressed enough that she was accelerating my development faster than her original plan had scheduled. Why is the timeline accelerating? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. The signal suppressor sat between us, blocking whatever the building sensor was trying to log. Outside the cafeteria, windows the campus morning was running normally. Students, faculty, the particular noise of a university district at full operation. The root sent something last night, she said finally. I detected it at approximately 1 a.m. After you completed the dungeon absorption, sent something. Like a message, I said. Like a probe, she said. A tendril of its energy extended upward through the port infrastructure to the surface. It retracted after about 10 minutes. But it had registered something. She paused. It registered the copying absorption. The dungeon run. The D-rank transition. The root had noticed. Something 60 meters underground with enough power to absorb SSS-Rank hunters had detected my absorption activity from across the city and sent a probe to check. Is that bad? I said. It means the root is aware of you specifically, she said, which changes things. Roots don't usually pay attention to D-rank entities. The fact that it noticed you means your skill type is relevant to it in some way that standard D-rank capability wouldn't be. Relevant. I turned that word over. The root collected SSS-Rank hunters because their energy was attractive. High density, strong signal. It had been feeding on ambient city energy for 40 years and determined that SSS-Rank signatures were specifically worth the effort of collection. My skill was a copying absorption, not a standard power source. But if the root had been holding 3 SSS-Rank hunters for 2 weeks, Maybe it had been examining the question of how to process them, and an absorption ability that interacted with that question in some way. It thinks I might be able to communicate with it, I said. Maybe, she said. Or it thinks you're a threat to its collection? We don't know which, but we know it's watching you now, and the guilds are watching the district, and the sensor grid closes in 7 days. So I need to be significantly stronger before any of those 3 things becomes a direct problem, I said. Yes, she said. I looked at the map. Jangwuri, 12 p.m., the courtyard behind the science building. It was 9:40. I had 2 hours and 20 minutes. The science building courtyard was on the northeast edge of campus, a functional outdoor space, mostly concrete, with a few trees planted in geometric arrangements and benches along the perimeter. Not a social space at all, more of a maintenance throughway that students cut across because it saved 90 seconds between buildings. At 11:50, I was sitting on a bench at the south end with a textbook open. Lee June, student, catching some air between classes. Standard background element. The phase sensitivity was running at maximum passive range. At D rank, with the void crawlers, phase sensitivity, and CO Minky's perception expansion. Both integrated, I could feel skill boundaries within 70 meters with a clarity that was almost visual. Jangwuri arrived at 11:58. The gravity manipulation field arrived slightly before she did. A distortion in the ambient spatial arrangement of the courtyard that the phase sensitivity read like a signature. Distinctive, recognizable. A-rank energy handled at the level of someone who'd been using the ability for years. She was shorter than I'd expected for an A-rank. Mid-30s, dressed in the kind of civilian clothing that was clearly chosen to not look like a uniform while still being functional for rapid movement. She sat on a bench at the north end of the courtyard. The emotional perception read her state, not the settled quality of Ha Yunbi's baseline, something more complex. The emotional texture of someone carrying a weight they'd been carrying long enough that it had become background. Grief, possibly, underneath the professional surface, or the specific exhaustion of someone who had lost colleagues and was still required to function. 2 of the 3 missing SSS hunters were Iron Vanguard members. Jangwuri had been deployed in response to losing people she probably knew. That was information I filed carefully, not sympathy. I couldn't afford to let sympathy complicate the operational picture, but context matters operationally. The emotional perception was giving me more than tactical data. It was giving me a person with a weight to her. The hunger skills preliminary scan ran automatically. A-rank, gravity manipulation. The scan was slower than usual. A-rank skill complexity was significantly above what I'd analyzed before. The system was processing layers. The detail mattered for what came next. Gravity manipulation primary. Spatial weight field generation. Alter the effective gravitational constant within a defined radius. Range scales with concentration and rank level. Secondary. Gravity sense. Passive awareness of weight distribution in a significant radius. Objects, people, structural elements, all registered as gravitational signatures. The gravity sense was running right now. I felt the edge of its field brush past my position and continued past. The field was reading me as a static object, a seated human weight signature that matched the surrounding environment. The shadow concealment wasn't active, but the energy suppression I'd been maintaining all day had flattened my signature to human baseline. She was resting. The gravity sense was running passively, not actively scanning. The difference was significant. I needed to get within contact range without triggering the active scan mode. The phase sensitivity could tell me where the boundary was between passive and active. The seismic sense could tell me what her physical state was, breathing rate, muscle tension, the specific signature of a trained hunter at rest versus on alert. Breathing rate was slow. Muscle tension was reduced from operational baseline. She was genuinely resting, not performing rest while actively monitoring. The 12 p.m. window was real. I had one option for closing the distance without triggering the gravity sense's passive detection of a moving human weight signature approaching across open courtyard. The void crawler's spatial distortion was a field effect. It created a zone of disrupted directional sense. But I hadn't used it yet at D rank with the perception expansion integration. I didn't know exactly what it would do in combination. I took the risk. Activated spatial distortion at the absolute minimum output, not enough to visibly affect the environment. Just enough to create a localized disruption in the gravitational field reading immediately around my body. The detail mattered for what came next. To Jangwuri's gravity sense, my weight signature would read as distorted. Not absent, not clearly defined. The detail mattered for what came next. Something ambiguous that might register as interference in the courtyard's concrete structure rather than a moving person. I stood up slowly, walked toward the north end of the bench at the pace of a student crossing a courtyard toward a building entrance. The gravity sense's passive field continued its sweep. The distortion was working. I registered as background noise rather than a coherent human weight signature, close but uncertain. 6 meters from her bench, I stopped. The preliminary scan was still running, still processing the A-rank complexity. I needed more time in proximity for a complete enough read to attempt the copy. I sat on the ground beside a concrete planter, taking a call from any observer's perspective, head slightly down, phone visible, student having a private conversation. The hunger skill worked in silence. The A-rank complexity required sustained proximity to map properly. Secondary skills in an A-rank awakened weren't distinct layers the way D-rank and below presented. They were integrated, woven together at a structural level that took time to read accurately. Gravity manipulation, primary field generation, already mapped. Gravity sense, passive awareness field, mapped. Third component emerging from the analysis, gravity well, a concentrated variant of the field effect. Instead of altering weight across a radius, it creates a single point of extreme gravitational force. Range, whatever distance Zhang Wuori could project it. Effect, catastrophic compression of anything within the targeted point. Gravity well was what had made Zhang Wuori A rank rather than B rank. The field effects were useful, powerful, tactically flexible. The well was a weapon that didn't have a natural counter below a certain power threshold. I filed it. The mapping was complete enough. Now the question was contact. The copy process required proximity, but it didn't require physical touch for the preliminary mapping. That part had been done at 6 meters. The actual transfer required closer contact, but not necessarily direct skin contact. The detail mattered for what came next. The dungeon absorptions had taught me the skill could work through a meter or so of intervening space if the preliminary mapping was complete. She was 3 meters away. I was at 1 meter of effective range. Moving 2 meters closer to a resting A-rank hunter without triggering the gravity sense required the spatial distortion to hold at a sustained output that I hadn't tested yet. And any increase in output from baseline ran the risk of the distortion itself becoming visible, a local spatial anomaly that a gravity manipulation specialist might detect even at rest. Narrow margin, very narrow margin, but not zero. I moved 1 meter closer. The gravity sense swept past again, still reading me as background, still processing the distortion as environmental noise. The hunger skill reached out at the reduced distance and engaged the skill structure. The copy process began. The detail mattered for what came next. A rank human absorption was different from the D-rank hunter's Seominki, in the same way a city was different from a building. The sheer volume of experience integrated into Zhang Wuori's skill use, years of A-rank operation, thousands of field applications, the specific calibrations built through repeated high-stakes use, all of it was part of what the hunger skill was trying to map and copy. It was going to take longer than any previous absorption. I stayed still. The Lee June cover held the space. Student sitting beside a planter, phone in hand. Nothing unusual. 7 minutes in, the gravity sense shifted, not toward me, toward the north courtyard entrance. Someone was approaching. The field read them as human weight, moving with a specific pattern of a person, looking for someone rather than just crossing the space. I felt the change in Zhang Wuori's physical state through the seismic sense. Breathing rate up, the detail mattered for what came next. Muscle tension returning to operational baseline, coming back online. Rest period ending early due to incoming contact. The copy process was at 60%. Gravity manipulation, fully mapped. Gravity sense, fully mapped. Gravity, well, partially mapped. The partial mapping would transfer as a partial skill. Functional, but reduced capability. I had the choice to push for the full copy or abort and preserve the partial. Aborting meant withdrawing before Zhang Wuori's active awareness came back online. Pushing meant another 2 or 3 minutes in proximity while she transitioned to operational readiness. And an A-rank hunter at operational readiness with gravity sense active would almost certainly detect me despite the spatial distortion. I withdrew, stood up naturally from beside the planter, pocketed my phone, and walked toward the east building entrance at exactly the pace of a student who'd finished a call and was resuming their day. System notification appeared as I pushed through the building door. Partial copy complete. Skills transferred. Gravity manipulation, full. Gravity sense, full. Gravity well, 43% capability. 43% of a gravity well. I thought about what that meant while walking down the corridor. A full gravity well from an A-rank hunter could probably compress a car into a ball. 43% could probably compress something considerably smaller than a car. Still. Gravity manipulation and gravity sense at full copy from an A-rank source. The skill composite had just changed significantly in terms of energy density. The system's rank display would need time to process the addition. I found an empty classroom and sat against the wall for 10 minutes while the integration settled. The gravity sense came online as the copy completed, and the sensation was immediately overwhelming in a way none of the previous acquisitions had been. Every object in the room registered as a gravitational signature. The desk, the chairs, the structural pillars, the ceiling fixtures, all of it mapped in terms of weight and mass and spatial relationship. and through the walls and floors extending out to the gravity sense's operational range, which at A-rank full copy was significantly further than I'd expected. I could feel Jiang Wuri in the courtyard, still there, speaking with whoever had come to find her. I could feel Kim Taeyang 2 buildings to the west, moving with his grid sweep pattern. I could feel the Iron Vanguard sensor node in the building nearby, its specific electromagnetic weight registering as a distinct, non-organic signature. I could feel Ha Eunbi at the north edge of the campus, sitting still, waiting. The detail mattered for what came next. The gravity sense at A rank was a completely different tool from anything in my previous skill set, not just detection, spatial mapping. A continuous, passive, three-dimensional map of weight and mass in a very large radius. Navigating the city with this was going to be like having a permanent blueprint. The rank display updated. D to D+. The single A-rank copy hadn't pushed the full rank transition, but the complexity increase was registered. The system labeled it. Energy signature complexity elevated above standard D-rank parameters. The detail mattered for what came next. Elevated above standard D-rank. The Iron Vanguard sensor network was calibrated for standard rank classifications. An elevated complexity signature might register differently than a clean D-rank read. I needed to check with Ha Eunbi whether this changed the sensor timeline. The detail mattered for what came next. She was at the north edge of campus, exactly where the gravity sense had placed her, sitting on a bench near the botanical garden, reading. She looked up when I approached. The emotional perception read her state change as I sat down. The settled quality was something sharper underneath it. How did it go? She said. Partial copy, I said. Gravity manipulation full and gravity sense full. Gravity well at 43%. Rest period ended early. Someone came to find her. She absorbed that information for a moment. Full gravity sense from an A-rank copy, she said slowly. That's going to be... She paused. That's going to change your operational picture significantly. It already has, I said. I could feel you sitting here from the classroom 2 buildings over. The detail mattered for what came next. She looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between impressed and recalibrating her assessment of my current capability. The gravity sense is a mapping tool at that level, she said. You're not just detecting, you're building a spatial model of everything in range. Real time, I said. Continuously updated. I can feel the entire campus right now. Every person, every object, every sensor node in the coverage area. She was quiet for a moment. Then, can you feel the route? I hadn't tried. The route was under the port district, which was more than a kilometer from my current position. The gravity sense range at a full A-rank copy, I didn't know exactly what it was. The operational range Jiang Wuri used in field conditions might not be the theoretical maximum. I extended the gravity sense as far as it would go. The campus faded into the surrounding city. Buildings, traffic, thousands of human weight signatures moving through their day. The sensor nodes registered as distinct non-organic weights. The Iron Vanguard assets in the district. The detail mattered for what came next, registered as specifically calibrated masses, the specific weight distribution of trained fighters and operational gear, past the commercial district, past the residential blocks, into the industrial area. The route registered at full extension of the gravity sense range, barely at the edge of what the skill could reach, not as a creature or a person or a defined object, as an absence, a gravitational anomaly where there should have been standard geological mass, and instead there was something that didn't behave like rock or soil or concrete. Something that displaced its own mass rather than having it. It's there, I said. Edge of range. Feels like a hole. The gravity reads as a negative space rather than a positive mass. Ha! Eunbi put her book down entirely. A route that suppresses its own gravitational signature, she said. The detail mattered for what came next. That's more sophisticated than I knew. It's not just hiding its energy output, it's hiding its physical mass. The detail mattered for what came next. Something 40 years old that had learned to be invisible to gravity sense type abilities. Whatever Jiang Wuri's scan had been detecting from the port district area, it hadn't been the route. The route was below that, hiding below the hiding. The SSS hunters had found the edge of its suppression field, Ha Eunbi had said. Not the route itself, the field boundary, which was itself a concealment layer, which meant the route had at least 2 layers of concealment, the energy suppression and the mass suppression. And if the mass suppression was readable to my gravity sense at range, it meant my gravity sense was the detail mattered for what came next. Operating at a level the route hadn't accounted for in its concealment strategy. It had hidden itself from standard gravity sense detection. But standard gravity sense detection at A-rank looked for mass directly. The copied A-rank version I was running, combined with the void feeder's spatial distortion awareness and the perception expansion from SEO Minky, was reading the absence rather than the presence. The route had hidden itself from people looking for what was there. I was reading what wasn't there. I told Ha Yunbi. Her expression went through several stages in about 4 seconds. She pulled out a notebook, paper again, no digital trail, and started writing quickly. If you can triangulate its exact position using the gravitational absence reading, she said while writing, that changes the extraction approach entirely. We wouldn't need to enter through the surface access points. We could map the structure and find a pathway that doesn't go through the high-density collection area where it holds the SSS hunters. A pathway that bypassed the highest concentration of root energy, that reduced the risk of me being absorbed by the thing I was trying to interact with. I need to get closer to triangulate, I said. The reading at this range is too imprecise. I can tell there's a mass anomaly. I can't map the structure. She stopped writing. Getting closer means moving into the industrial district, she said, which is adjacent to where the root probed last night, if it's watching for you specifically. Then it will notice when I move into closer range, regardless of what I do, I said. The question is whether I'm strong enough to handle that when it happens. She looked at the notebook, then at me. What's your current assessment of your own capability, she said. The detail mattered for what came next. I thought through the honest answer. D-rank official classification, skill set including gravity manipulation, spatial distortion, seismic sense, shadow concealment, emotional perception, heat reading, phase sensitivity, perception expansion, partial threat mapping, partial gravity well, and the composite creature skills from the dungeon run, regeneration from the acid slug, shell durability from the stone sentinel. All of it integrated and running as a continuous system. The detail mattered for what came next. Against something that had absorbed 3 SSS-Rank hunters. The math was still not in my favor, but the gap was different than it had been 2 days ago. Not ready, I said honestly, but closer than I was, and the 7-day sensor timeline means I don't have weeks to prepare. She nodded. There's a B-rank hunter who conducts independent operations in the industrial district, she said, not guild-affiliated. Works solo contracts. Name is Ryu Hanjun. Specialization is terrain manipulation. He can reshape environmental structures. He knows the port area better than anyone because he's been contracted to survey the structural condition of decommissioned port infrastructure for the City Development Office. A B-rank terrain specialist who regularly worked in the exact area where the route was located, who had, presumably, developed instincts and environmental awareness about that area specifically. If I could copy his terrain awareness, his knowledge of the port infrastructure's structural layout, I would have a map, not a gravitational absence reading from a kilometer away. An actual map of what was down there, built from years of survey work. Where is he now, I said. She checked her notes. The survey contract runs Tuesday and Thursday, she said. Today is Wednesday. He'll be at his regular location tomorrow morning. Tomorrow. That left tonight free, which meant I had a decision to make about how to use tonight. The detail mattered for what came next. The rank progression was the priority. D+ wasn't enough. The sensor timeline wasn't the only pressure. The Roots probe last night meant the situation was moving, whether I moved with it or not. I needed to find an accelerant. Something that would push the rank progression faster than the steady accumulation of individual absorptions. I thought about the Jade Spire dungeon. 3 C rank absorptions in one night. The efficiency of a controlled environment with multiple high-quality targets. The Jade Spire wouldn't be viable again. One-time access before they noticed the creatures were gone. The detail mattered for what came next. But there were other guilds, other training dungeons, other facilities running maintenance windows with skeleton crews and predictable patrol rotations. How many guild training facilities are there in this city? I asked. Ha Unbi looked at me. She knew what I was thinking. 6, she said after a moment. 3 operated by Iron Vanguard. 1 by Jade Spire. 1 by the Celestial Path Guild. 1 independent facility that's unaffiliated. The detail mattered for what came next. Iron Vanguard facilities are off the table, I said. Maximum alert, SSS disappearances. They'll have upgraded security protocols on everything they operate. Which leaves Jade Spire, already used, Celestial Path, and the independent facility, she said. She was already pulling notes. Celestial Path runs a C-rank training dungeon on the south side. Smaller than Jade Spire. 3 creatures, not 4. They don't have interior monitor rotation. The facility manager reviews footage in the morning rather than monitoring live. No interior monitor. Full target access. And Celestial Path's creatures, what are they? I asked. The detail mattered for what came next. She read from her notes. A frost lurker, ice type, ambush predator, specializes in environmental temperature manipulation. A phantom shade, incorporeal type, passes through solid matter, attacks by phasing through targets. The detail mattered for what came next. And a blood construct, an organic assembly that can reshape its physical form and regenerate from significant damage quickly. 3 C-rank creatures, different skill profiles from the Jade Spire set. Frost Lurker would add temperature manipulation and probably an ambush-type concealment enhancement. Phantom shade, passing through solid matter, was a capability that didn't exist anywhere in my current toolkit. Blood construct's rapid reshaping and regeneration would significantly upgrade the acid slug's basic regeneration I'd been running. If I absorbed all three tonight, the rank transition to C rank might be reachable. C rank. In 5 weeks from F. The math was not sane. The skill was not operating on sane parameters. Go tonight, she said. She'd reached the same conclusion. I'll monitor the Celestial Path Patrol rotation and provide the same support as last night. The maintenance window is 2 a.m. to 5 a.m., slightly shorter than Jade Spire's. The detail mattered for what came next. 3 hours for 3 C-rank absorptions. Each one would take at minimum 30 minutes based on the complexity scaling I'd experienced. That was tight. Very tight. Celestial Path. 2 a.m. I had a lot of hours to fill between now and then. I spent 4 of them on something Ha Yunbi hadn't suggested, and I hadn't told her I was planning. The Iron Vanguard grid sweep was running continuously. Kim Taeyang was the asset I'd mapped most thoroughly. B rank, body enhancement, adaptive response. The preliminary scan I'd been running on him across 3 separate encounters had built up enough profile data that the copy process might complete faster than a full cold approach. He had a route. The gravity sense told me where he was in real time, the specific weight distribution of a trained fighter in operational gear, moving through the district in a consistent pattern. At 3 p.m., he entered the university library again, the same position as the previous afternoon. The emotional perception confirmed his state, calm, alert, patient, not looking for anything specific in the library, using it as a rest point. The detail mattered for what came next. I sat at a table on the other side of a bookshelf from where he'd positioned himself, close enough for the copy process, separated by enough shelving that a visual check wouldn't immediately place us in proximity. The detail mattered for what came next. The hunger skill engaged with Kim Taeyang's ability signature. The preliminary scan data from 3 encounters gave it a significant head start. The copy process ran faster than any previous human absorption, 12 minutes rather than 18, because most of the mapping was already complete. Body enhancement, copied fully. Adaptive response, copied fully. Something the earlier scans hadn't resolved clearly. A tertiary skill component. The system labeled it Resonance Strike, a technique type ability rather than a passive skill. And when body enhancement was active, Resonance Strike allowed the user to focus the enhanced physical force into a single precise impact point, rather than distributing it across the contact surface. The result was a strike that bypassed armor by concentrating all force into a single small area, rather than spreading across a larger surface. Resonance Strike. Filed. The copy completed. Kim Taeyang on the other side of the bookshelf had no idea. He was reading something on his phone, running his grid sweep coverage, being completely unaware that the ghoul, sitting 12 feet away, had just added his signature ability to its collection. I stood up, returned a book I'd been using as a prop to its shelf, and left the library. The detail mattered for what came next. Rank update. D+ moving towards C rank threshold. The body enhancement edition had pushed the energy complexity another step. The system was registering the composite now as something that didn't neatly fit the standard rank parameters. 2 down, Zhang Wori's gravity set and Kim Taeyang's enhancement set. Both copied without detection. Both sources still fully capable. If the Celestial Path dungeon went as planned tonight, the rank threshold would be within reach. The detail mattered for what came next. The hours before 2 a.m. moved slowly. I went through the motions of the Legion cover with less attention than usual because most of my awareness was running through the gravity sense, mapping the district, tracking the patrol patterns, watching the route's gravitational absence at the edge of range. The route didn't probe again. Whatever it had registered last night, the probe had been a one-time information gathering action rather than an ongoing investigation. It had checked. It knew something was there. Now it was waiting. The detail mattered for what came next. Patient. Aha, Yunbi had described it as old and patient. I was starting to understand what that meant practically. Something that had been hiding for 40 years and feeding quietly for 40 years didn't operate on a timeline that registered days as urgent. It could wait weeks, months. It had been waiting for decades already. The guilds couldn't wait. The sensor network couldn't wait. I couldn't wait. 2 a.m. I left the apartment through the window and moved south through the city toward the Celestial Path facility. The gravity sense made navigation at night entirely different from the shadow concealment navigation I'd been using before. I could feel the city around me in 3 dimensions without needing to see it. Every pedestrian a weight signature, every vehicle a moving mass, every sensor node a distinct, non-organic presence. The Iron Vanguard grid sweep was visible in real time. 2 B-rank assets moving through their patrol routes in the commercial district. 1 C-rank asset at a fixed observation point near the main road junction. None of them in the path I'd chosen. The Celestial Path facility was a converted research building on the south side. Smaller than Jade Spire, tighter layout, the dungeon portal sealed into the basement level rather than the main floor. Hatyunbi was on a fire escape across the street. I felt her the moment I came within gravity sense range, her specific weight signature, still and watching. The emotional perception added the texture, alert, focused, that settled quality with something underneath it tonight that felt like anticipation. She signaled. Clear. Patrol had just completed its rotation. I moved to the service entrance, different lock type from Jade Spire, but the same design logic. Inside in 30 seconds. The basement dungeon was colder than Jade Spire's. The Frost Lurker's ambient temperature effect extended into the portal environment itself, dropping the air temperature to something close to freezing. The cold registered against the heat, reading as a strong thermal contrast. The creature itself would be significantly colder than the environment. First target. The Frost Lurker was at the far end of the dungeon space, stationary in a depression in the floor that had been cleared of all insulation material. It was essentially sleeping in a cold well, its body temperature at the absolute minimum of its viable range. The detail mattered for what came next. Ice-type creature absorptions. I had no previous experience with this specific energy type. The preliminary scan was building quickly on a cold red from 30 meters. Frost Lurker, C-Rank. Primary, thermal extraction. Draws heat from environment and living targets at range, converting it to stored energy. Secondary, ice formation. Manifests stored thermal energy in reverse, creating ice structures with precision control. Tertiary, ambush stillness. Can reduce all biological processes to near zero activity, becoming effectively undetectable to heat-based and motion-based detection. Ambush stillness. That was immediately interesting. A skill that could reduce my own biological activity signature to near zero would make the heat reading I'd acquired from the Flame Drake completely unable to detect me. Stealth on a new layer. The absorption took 38 minutes. The cold made the process slightly slower. The Frost Lurker's energy was resistant in a way that mineral and fire types hadn't been, but it processed through completely. Frost Lurker absorbed. Thermal extraction, ice formation, ambush stillness, all transferred. The cold in the room immediately registered differently, not as an uncomfortable environmental condition, but as stored potential. The thermal extraction had come online the moment the copy completed, and was already beginning to process the ambient temperature as a resource. Rank update, C-Rank threshold approaching. Not there yet. 2 more. The Phantom Shade was in the center chamber. It was the most visually distinctive creature I'd encountered in any absorption, a roughly humanoid form made of something that wasn't quite solid and wasn't quite not solid. The visual impression was of a person-shaped smear in reality, present in a way that suggested more dimensions than the room had. The Hunger Skills preliminary scan on the Phantom Shade required more distance to begin, because the creature's incorporeal nature made the energy signature harder to read at contact range. Too diffuse, too distributed. I had to approach to 20 meters before the scan could build properly. The detail mattered for what came next. Phantom Shade. C-Rank. Primary. Phase shift. Temporarily transitions body into an incorporeal state, allowing passage through solid matter. Duration. Limited by concentration. Secondary. Reality anchor. While in solid state, creates a binding effect that prevents target from entering incorporeal states. Tertiary. Shade sense. Detects disruptions in the phase boundary between solid and incorporeal states within a moderate range. Phase shift, passage through solid matter. The practical applications of that skill in my current, the detail mattered for what came next. Operating environment were enormous, passing through locked doors, through walls, through the floors of buildings. The kind of movement capability that completely changed how I could approach and exit targets. Reality anchor was interesting from a defensive standpoint. If something tried to use an incorporeal attack or skill against me, the anchor could potentially counter it. The Phantom Shade absorption took 41 minutes, the most complex of the 3. Incorporeal energy didn't interact with the hunger skill the way solid-type energies did. The system had to develop a new interfacing approach partway through, which I felt as a pause in the process before it resumed with a different technique. But it completed. Phase shift transferred. Not at full initial proficiency, using it would require practice to stabilize, but the capability was there. 1 more. 51 minutes remaining in the window. The blood construct was in the final chamber. It was the most unsettling creature I'd encountered in any. The detail mattered for what came next. Dungeon. Not because it was aggressive or threatening, but because it was wrong in a specific biological way. An assembly of organic material that had been reshaped so many times that the original structure was no longer visible. Functional, mobile, but deeply, fundamentally wrong-looking. Blood construct, C-Rank. Primary, rapid reshaping. Restructures own physical form in real time. adapting shape to current tactical requirements. Secondary, accelerated regeneration, tissue repair at a rate significantly faster than standard biological healing. Tertiary, composition reading, passive analysis of the biological structure of nearby organisms, identifying weaknesses in physical construction. The accelerated regeneration would completely replace the acid slug's basic version I'd been using since day one. The rapid reshaping, being able to alter my own physical structure, was a capability I hadn't encountered before in the absorption chain. The composition reading was a new layer of analytical ability that could, in principle, apply to any biological target I encountered, including, potentially, whatever the root was made of at the organic level. Blood construct absorption, 39 minutes. The accelerated regeneration came online immediately, and I felt the difference. The background cellular repair that the acid slug's version had provided was now running at a rate that was immediately and viscerally different, faster, more comprehensive, more deeply integrated with the body's existing processes. Mission complete. 3 C-rank absorptions. 47 minutes remaining in the window. The rank notification appeared as I stood in the 4th chamber of the Celestial Path dungeon. Rank threshold reached. Transitioning D+ to C rank. That notification appeared at the bottom of my field of vision while I stood in the 4th chamber. C rank. 6 weeks from F rank sewer rat. The system's energy signature display updated, and then it updated again with an additional notation I hadn't seen before. Warning, energy signature complexity exceeds standard C rank parameters. Current signature flagged as composite anomaly. Standard detection algorithms may not accurately classify. Composite anomaly. The monitoring network's standard detection algorithm didn't have a category for what my signature currently was. An accumulation of skills from A rank, B rank, C rank, D rank, and E rank sources, creature and human. The detail mattered for what came next, natural and awakened, processed through a copying absorption mechanism that had never existed in the system's dataset. The sensor grid would register me as an anomaly, not a clean classification. An alert would trigger. The detail mattered for what came next, but the alert wouldn't include a threat level because the algorithm couldn't assess a threat level for something it couldn't classify. That was both better and worse than what I'd been managing before. Better because a misclassification alert was lower priority than a clean threat identification. Worse because an anomaly flag was still a flag, and someone in Iron Vanguard's analysis team would eventually look at it. I exited the Celestial Path facility. Ha Unbi was waiting outside, having come down from the fire escape when the patrol rotation moved through. She looked at me in the streetlight for a long moment. The emotional perception read her state, the settled quality, and underneath it, something that was moving quickly. Reassessment. Recalibration. C rank, I said. The dungeon went clean. She exhaled slowly. She paused. That's faster than I thought was possible. Even accounting for the copying mechanism, the blood construct gave me composition reading, I said. If I can get close enough to the root to use it, the detail mattered for what came next. I might be able to read its biological structure. Find the specific points where it's holding the SSS hunters. She thought about that. If you can identify where they are inside its structure, we might be able to extract them without the root releasing them voluntarily. A physical approach instead of a negotiation approach. Which would be faster, I said. Much faster, she agreed. But it requires you to be inside the root's effective range while using composition reading. Which puts you inside the collection zone. Which requires you to be strong enough that collection isn't possible. What rank do I need to be? I asked again. Same question as yesterday. Different context now. She looked at me directly. The settled quality in her emotional state had something different in it than it had before. Something that felt like she was making a decision about what to tell me. The root absorbed SSS-Rank hunters by generating a targeted energy pull, she said. The pull works on the principle of overwhelming the target's energy output with a superior absorption force. She paused. If your absorption skill copies rather than takes, you might be able to absorb the root's pull itself. Turn the mechanism against the mechanism, absorbing the absorption, taking the root's pulling force and copying it in the moment it was applied, using the copy to redirect rather than be redirected. If that worked, I wouldn't need to be above the root's level to survive the interaction. I'd need to be fast enough to copy the mechanism before it completed its pull, which was a question of absorption speed rather than raw rank. How fast is my absorption speed currently? I asked. She shook her head. I don't know. There's no baseline for a copying absorption. Standard absorption speed data doesn't apply to your mechanism. We'd need to test it against something with a comparable pull force to know. Tomorrow, I said. Ryu Hanjun, the terrain specialist in the port district. She nodded. The terrain knowledge and the port infrastructure map are still the priority, but if you can also test the absorption speed in a controlled enough context while you're there, I'll see what's possible, I said. She pulled the signal suppressor from her pocket and handed it to me. Take this. When you move into the route's range tomorrow, it won't help with the route, but it'll prevent the guild sensor network from logging your location in the port district. The detail mattered for what came next. I took it. It was small and light and carried the specific weight signature of something that had been built rather than manufactured, assembled from components by someone who knew what they were building. You made this, I said. 4 years of collecting has its practical applications, she said. One of the things I absorbed early in the process was a skill for understanding technical construction. Combined with what I'd accumulated at the time, she shrugged. The devices aren't complicated once you understand the sensor architecture. A collector who built counter-surveillance equipment. 4 years of operating in a city under guild monitoring had turned her into something self-sufficient in very specific ways. Get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow is going to be more complicated than tonight. The detail mattered for what came next. I walked home through the pre-dawn city with a gravity sense mapping the district in real time, a phase shift capability that I hadn't tested yet, an ambush stillness that could reduce my biological signature to near zero, and the specific weight of the signal suppressor in my hand. C rank, 6 weeks. 41 skills in the composite. The route was a gravitational absence 60 meters underground, ancient and patient, holding 3 of the world's most powerful fighters in a structure that nobody had been able to map. Tomorrow I was going into the port district. Not to fight it, not yet. Just to listen, to read it, to understand what it was made of and where the people inside it were being held. Just reconnaissance. I was absolutely not ready for whatever came after reconnaissance. But the timeline said ready wasn't optional. I got back to the apartment at 4:20 a.m., sat on the floor, ran the full system assessment one more time. C rank, composite anomaly, 41 skill components, 1 signal suppressor, 1 mission tomorrow, 3 SSS-Rank hunters somewhere inside 60 meters of old port infrastructure, held by something that had been patient for 40 years, and 1 useless ghoul with a useless skill 5 weeks in getting ready to go say hello. The detail mattered for what came next. Drop a comment telling me whether you think the route is actually hostile or whether it's doing something else entirely. I have a feeling the comment section is going to be divided on this one. The port district at 6 a.m. looked exactly like something that had given up. Rusted cranes standing at angles they weren't designed for, warehouses with windows that had been broken long enough that nobody remembered when, roads that hadn't seen regular traffic in a decade. The asphalt cracked into a pattern that looked like a map of a place that had given up trying. I arrived early because the gravity sense had been tracking Ryu Hanjun's approach route since he left his apartment 40 minutes ago, and I wanted to be in position before he arrived at his survey site. The signal suppressor Ha Yunbi had given me was in my left pocket, active. The guild sensor network logged this district as low priority coverage, not zero, but enough below the main grid that Ha Yunbi's signal suppressor in my pocket reduced the detection risk to manageable levels. Ryu Hanjun was B rank, terrain manipulation specialist. He'd been surveying this specific port infrastructure for 14 months under a city development office contract. 14 months of weekly visits meant his knowledge of the structural layout here was probably better than anyone in any guild database. I needed that knowledge. The composition reading from the blood construct would let me read biological structure. But to use it effectively inside the route's range, I needed to know the physical geography of where I was going, what was above me, below me, what connected to what. Ryu Hanjun was the map. He arrived at 6:40. The gravity sense picked him up before I saw him, a specific weight distribution that read as a large person moving with routine efficiency. That read as a large person moving with the unhurried efficiency of someone who'd walked this route many times. He carried survey equipment, the gravitational signature of metal instruments in a canvas bag. He didn't look like a B-rank hunter. He looked like a city contractor who had been doing this job long enough that it had become entirely routine. Mid-40s, practical clothing, with the specific expression of someone who was here to work and intended to work efficiently. He set up his survey equipment at the edge of the first decommissioned warehouse and began taking readings without any observable hesitation. 14 months of routine. The Hunger Skills preliminary scan started immediately. B-rank energy, different in texture from Kim Taeyang's structured enhancement. Ryu Hanjun's ability felt more distributed, more environmental in character, less focused on the user's own body and more extended into the surrounding structural space around him. Terrain manipulation, primary component mapping, spatial restructuring of geological and constructed material within a defined operational range. He could reshape the ground, the walls, the structural elements of everything around him, compress, extend, redirect. An entire built environment became clay in his hands within his range, secondary component emerging from the scan. Environmental memory, a passive record of every terrain modification Ryu Hanjun had ever made or observed. A continuous accumulation of spatial data about every location he'd ever operated in. 14 months of weekly port surveys in one place, Weekly port surveys would have built an extraordinarily detailed environmental memory of this specific district. If I copied environmental memory, I would have his map, not an approximation. His actual accumulated spatial understanding of every tunnel, every foundation level, every structural access point in the port infrastructure, including the areas 60 meters below the surface where the route existed. I moved to working distance and stayed there for the full copy process. Ryu Hanjun ran his surveys with complete focus on his equipment. He never looked in my direction. The shadow concealment was running at low passive output, enough to make me visually unremarkable without generating a detectable skill signature. 31 minutes. The copy completed. Terrain manipulation transferred fully. Environmental memory transferred fully. And with environmental memory came something I hadn't expected. A sensation like a city-sized archive opening in my mind all at once. 14 months of structural data, every level of the port infrastructure, every subsurface access point, every drainage tunnel, every foundation cavity. The geology of the ground beneath the district, layer by layer, down to depths that standard survey work didn't usually reach. And at 62 meters below the surface, in a cavity that shouldn't have been there based on standard geological models of this area, a space that Ryu Hanjun had registered as an unexplained anomaly in his survey data, and flagged for further investigation without ever receiving a follow-up instruction from the development office. The route's cavity, mapped through 14 months of environmental sensing by a B-rank specialist who hadn't known what he was detecting. The map was exact. I could see every access pathway into the route's cavity. 3 direct routes and 2 indirect ones, all of it precise. The direct routes went through areas of densely compacted earth. The route had reinforced them, possibly deliberately. The indirect routes used existing infrastructure, a drainage channel running adjacent to the cavity wall, and a foundation access tunnel from a decommissioned warehouse. And a foundation access tunnel from a decommissioned warehouse that came within 8 meters of the cavity's eastern edge. 8 meters. Through earth that Ryu Hanjun's environmental memory recorded as unusually dense and specifically resistant to the kind of geological pressure that should have distributed more naturally. The route had shaped the earth around itself. I left the port district at 7:15 and messaged Ha Eunbi through the communication method she'd established, a specific sequence of short signal pulses on the frequency the signal suppressor used. She'd explained the protocol. It translated to, "Meet now, information ready." She arrived at the botanical garden bench at 7:40. I laid out everything, the environmental memory data, the 3 access routes, the 2 indirect pathways, the specific geological composition of the earth between the drainage channel and the cavity wall. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sat quietly for a long moment. The emotional perception read something complex moving through her settled baseline, the specific quality of someone whose model of a situation has just been replaced by a more accurate one. "The drainage channel approach is the one," she said finally. "The foundation tunnel comes within 8 meters, but the route has actively reinforced that direction. It's paying attention to the tunnel approach. The drainage channel runs parallel to the cavity wall. It would register as environmental flow rather than an intentional approach. Water covers sound and vibration," I said, "and thermal signature. If I use the frost lurker's ambush stillness while in the water, my biological signature drops to near 0. Heat reading, motion detection, energy emission, all suppressed." She looked at me steadily. "You're planning to approach it tonight." "I'm planning to approach it and use the composition reading," I said. "Map the interior of the cavity, find where the SSS hunters are being held, understand the route's biological structure well enough to know whether the absorption redirect idea is viable." "Just reconnaissance," she said. The way she said it suggested she knew exactly how that phrase tended to work out in practice. "Just reconnaissance," I confirmed. "If the situation becomes something other than reconnaissance at any point during the approach, I withdraw immediately. I'm not fighting a 40-year-old entity that absorbed 3 SSS-Rank hunters with my current capability." "What is your current capability assessment?" she asked. "Honestly?" I thought about it as honestly as I could. C-rank official classification. Skill composite, including A-rank gravity manipulation from Zhang Wori. B-rank body enhancement and terrain manipulation, multiple C-rank dungeon creature skills, and the accumulated base from 6 weeks of absorption. The signal complexity reads as a composite anomaly on guild detection systems. Physical capability significantly above standard C-rank through the body enhancement and shell durability integrations. Sensory range and accuracy well above anything a standard C-rank would carry. Against an SSS-absorbing root entity that's been developing for 40 years, I said. "I don't know. No baseline exists for this comparison." She nodded. "Then we treat it as reconnaissance until you have enough information to make a better assessment." She paused. "I'm going to be at the surface access point above the drainage channel. If the root makes a move on you, I'll know from the energy shift above ground. I can create a distraction." "What kind of distraction can you create?" I asked. She smiled very slightly. 4 years of collecting," she said. I have a few things available. I hadn't pushed her on the specifics of her own accumulated skills. She'd been careful not to enumerate them, and I'd been careful not to push. The boundary felt deliberate. She was sharing what I needed to know and not more. Probably reasonable operating procedure when working with someone you'd known for 72 hours. Tonight, I said, after midnight. The drainage channel has a surface access point 300 meters north of the cavity location. She nodded. I'll be there at 11:30. Signal when you're ready to enter. I spent the day doing the Lee June cover with the specific quality of attention that comes from knowing you're using. The last available hours before something significant happens. Classes. Library. The cafeteria where I'd first seen Ha Eunbi 3 days ago. The gravity sense tracked everything in the district continuously. Kim Taeyang's grid sweep. Jung Wori's patrol pattern. The Iron Vanguard sensor nodes. Their specific electromagnetic weights unchanged. The route's gravitational absence at the edge of extended range. Patient and still. At noon, the system flagged something new. The fourth sensor node, the one Ha Eunbi had identified as a 48-hour installation 2 blocks from my apartment, had adjusted its operational parameters. The gravity sense picked it up as a change in the electromagnetic weight distribution of the monitoring device. Active recalibration. It was recalibrating, narrowing its detection threshold downward. The timeline Ha Eunbi had given me, 7 days, had just compressed. The new node was accelerating its calibration toward the sensitivity level that would register my composite anomaly signature as an alert. 48 hours at most before the network in the university district registered my composite anomaly signature as a direct actionable problem. I messaged Ha Eunbi the update using the signal protocol. Her response came back in 4 pulses. She understood. The timeline had moved. At 3 p.m., the system flagged something else. The Hunger Skills passive scan had been running continuously across the extended range the gravity sense provided, monitoring the port district from the university side of the city. And something in the port district had shifted. The route's gravitational absence was the same, but adjacent to it, above it, extending toward the surface, there was a new signature. Not a probe like the one Ha Eunbi had described from 2 nights ago. Something more sustained. A presence rather than an investigation. Something was waiting near the surface of the route's location. The Hunger Skills analysis ran slowly on it. The energy was diffuse enough that full analysis wasn't possible at this range, but it was there, and it hadn't been there this morning. I had 2 options. Adjust the approach to account for the new variable, or accelerate the timeline and go in before the new variable could develop further. Adjusting meant another day of planning, another day inside a sensor network that was actively narrowing toward my detection threshold. Accelerating meant going in tonight without knowing what the surface presence above the route was or what it intended. The option that kept me stationary was the worse one. The sensor network closing was a fixed timeline. The route's surface presence was an unknown that would only become clearer by being closer to it. Tonight was still the right answer, but the approach parameters had changed in ways that required accounting for before I went underground. I messaged Ha Eunbi again. New element at route location surface level. Proceeding tonight, but approaching from further away initially, mapping the new signature before entering drainage channel. Her response came back in 4 pulses plus 2. Understood and agreed with the modified approach. She was operationally flexible. That mattered. 11 p.m. I left the apartment for the last time through the window, moving east through the city toward the port district. The gravity sense mapped my path continuously. Every guild asset, every civilian, every sensor node. Nothing in my route, nothing following. The port district at night was different from the port district at 6 a.m. The absence of even the minimal daytime activity made the stillness more complete. The cranes and warehouses existed in the kind of dark that cities don't usually produce, the kind that came from a district that had been administratively forgotten. The gravity sense felt the route from a kilometer away, the same gravitational absence, but subtly different at night. The ambient temperature drop that the frost lurker's thermal extraction was detecting from range suggested the route's surface presence was generating something, a localized thermal effect. Cold, but specifically cold, the way the frost lurker's own ability had felt in the dungeon. Cold at the route's surface location, something that used cold as either a byproduct of its existence or as an active mechanism. I found Ha Eunbi at the surface access point above the drainage channel at 11:22. She was already there. The gravity sense had placed her before I arrived. She'd been there for 30 minutes. There's something at the surface, I said without preamble. I know, she said. I can feel it from here. She was carrying something. The gravity sense registered it as a concentrated mass in her right hand, dense in a way that wasn't natural for an object that size. A stored energy source. Something she'd collected. Do you know what it is? I asked. Not exactly, she said, but I felt the route extend toward the surface twice before, both times before a significant energetic event in the district. She paused. The first time was 3 days before Park Jung-ho disappeared. The second time was the night Yoon Sera disappeared. It was preparing. The surface presence wasn't investigation, it was preparation. And something in the district was significant enough to the root that it was preparing now. Us? I said. Possibly, she said. Or the sensor network recalibration. High-density electromagnetic equipment is a detectable energy source. The new node calibrating its electromagnetic output 2 blocks from the port might be registering as something significant from 60 meters underground. Either way, the root was already in a heightened state. Approaching it in this condition was riskier than approaching a fully passive root would have been. But every hour we waited was an hour the sensor network moved closer to flagging my signature, and an hour the root had to prepare further. We go now, I said. Ha Yunbi handed me the dense object from her right hand. It was roughly the size and shape of a large coin, but the weight was wrong, far heavier than the size suggested. The energy signature was unfamiliar and multi-layered, in a way that reminded me of her own composite reading. What is this? I asked. Something I collected 4 years ago, she said. From a being that predated the portal events. I've never used it, because I've never encountered a situation where I understood the risk well enough to justify it. She met my eyes. If the root tries to pull you, this will create a localized field that inverts the pull for approximately 30 seconds. It's a one-time use. A 30-second window to either copy the root's pulling mechanism or get out of range. One use. Given to me by someone who'd been carrying it for 4 years without using it. Thank you, I said, and meant it. She nodded. Go. I'll be monitoring from here. Signal if you need the distraction. The drainage channel access point was a maintenance hatch 300 meters south of Ha Yunbi's position. The hatch opened onto a concrete-lined channel that ran full of slow-moving water, drainage from the surrounding industrial area, dark and cold in a way that registered clearly on the heat, reading as significantly below ambient temperature. I activated ambush stillness before entering the water. The biological process suppression took hold immediately, breathing rate dropping to near zero, body temperature lowering toward ambient metabolic activity, reducing to the absolute minimum required for maintained consciousness. The heat reading showed my thermal signature dropping to match the surrounding water, effectively invisible to any thermal detection. Then I entered the channel. Moving through the drainage water was slow. The current wasn't strong, but the ambush stillness limited my own movement to avoid generating vibration. The seismic sense was running in reverse, essentially running in reverse, telling me exactly what level of movement would generate detectable vibration through the channel walls above. 200 meters in, the gravity sense picked up the root's gravitational absence on the other side of the channel wall to my left. 8 meters of reinforced earth between me and the cavity edge. Ryu Hanjun's environmental memory was giving me the precise structural composition of that 8-meter stretch of earth. The root had shaped it, had compacted it in a way that was both measurably denser and energetically distinct from the natural geological composition surrounding it. The composition reading activated and extended outward, reaching through 8 meters of root-compacted earth to read what was in the cavity beyond. The root's biological structure was not what I had expected. I'd imagined something like a massive plant or fungal network. What the composition reading found on the other side of that earth was significantly more complex than any biological framework I'd been working from. Organic? Yes, but organized in a way that suggested something more deliberate than growth. Distributed nodes connected by filaments, not unlike a neural network in its fundamental structural logic, but scaled to occupy the entire cavity space and extending well beyond it. The filaments extended outward from the cavity in every direction, reaching into the surrounding geology, into the port infrastructure above, into the drainage system I was currently moving through. It was in the walls of this channel, had been for years. The drainage channel wasn't adjacent to the root, it was part of the root's extended structure. I stopped moving, stayed completely still in the cold water with the ambush stillness running at maximum and the composition reading extending through every surface around me. The filaments in the channel wall were passive, not actively monitoring, more like the environmental awareness you'd expect from something that had grown into every available space over 40 years, and simply registered everything that moved through it as background information. The ambush stillness was suppressing my biological signature to near zero. Near zero was not zero. A 40-year-old entity with filaments extending through the drainage system around me would have baseline data on normal biological signatures in this space. Rats, insects, microorganisms. My near-zero signature might read as unusual but not immediately alarming, in the same way a distortion field read as environmental noise rather than a detection target. Might. Possibly. There was no way to verify the assumption until the root made a decision about how to respond to the anomaly in its drainage system. The composition reading was building a structural map of the root as I stayed still. The distributed nodes, the composition reading identified 47 distinct nodes within readable range. Each node carried a different compositional signature, slightly different organizational structure, different energy density from its neighbors, distinct roles. And 3 of the nodes had a very specific compositional anomaly: human biological material, integrated but distinct from the root's native organic structure, not consumed and not broken down, held, specifically and carefully held, the way a biological cell contains something absorbed but not yet processed. The 3 SSS-Rank hunters were in nodes 11, 23, and 31. The composition reading gave me their positions precisely. Park Young-ho in node 11, 48 meters below the surface and approximately 60 meters northeast of where I was currently positioned in the drainage channel. Yoon Sara in node 23, 51 meters below and 45 meters east. Choi Min-ho in node 31, 55 meters below and 52 meters northeast. All of them alive. The composition reading could distinguish living biological material from non-living. All 3 SSS hunters were in a maintained biological state. Not active, not unconscious in a normal sense, but suspended. Like something had slowed their biological processes to a maintenance level and was keeping them there. Ambush stillness, I thought. The root was running something analogous to ambush stillness on its collected SSS hunters, keeping them suspended at minimum viable biological activity rather than dead or fully conscious. The root was running a deliberate preservation state. The root wasn't consuming them, it was holding them. And the compositional signature of the human material in each node showed no degradation. They were in the same biological condition they'd been in when they were collected. 2 weeks of suspension with no deterioration. If that was accurate, they could be extracted alive. All 3 of them. If the root released them, or if something could convince the root to release them. The gravity sense registered a shift in the gravitational field around the cavity. The root's absent signature changed on a way. Not a probe this time, not a surface extension. The entire cavity shifted its spatial arrangement subtly, like something very large becoming more attentive. It knew I was here. The ambush stillness had bought time, but not indefinite invisibility. Whatever passive awareness ran through the channel filaments had registered something sufficiently anomalous about the near-zero biological signature in the drainage water, not alarming enough to trigger immediate response, but enough to trigger attention. I had a decision to make in approximately the next 60 seconds. Option 1, withdraw. I had what I came for, the map of the hunters' locations, the confirmation that they were alive, the structural understanding of the root's biology. Mission accomplished for reconnaissance purposes. Exit now before the root moved from attentive to active. Option 2, stay. Make contact deliberately. Use the composition reading's understanding of the root's structure to attempt something that wasn't withdrawal and wasn't confrontation. The hunger skill was running its analysis on the root through the composition reading data. The result was coming back slowly. The root's complexity was above anything the skill had previously analyzed, but the preliminary result was visible. Root entity, classification, ancient organic collective. Age estimate, 47 years. Primary mechanism, absorption and preservation, not consumption. Secondary mechanism, energy integration. Absorbed entity's energy is maintained and accessible to the collective as a resource without destroying the source. Tertiary mechanism, the system paused. Processing. Tertiary mechanism, communication. The root maintains information exchange with preserved entities through the integration filaments. It was talking to them. The 3 SSS hunters and their suspension nodes, the root was in ongoing communication with them through the filaments. Not consumption, not imprisonment in the conventional sense of isolation and containment, something closer to a sustained attempted connection. The SSS hunters weren't captives in a cell. They were integrated into a communication network with a 47-year-old collective intelligence that had been alone underground for its entire existence. The picture was completely different from what I'd been working with, and the root was now actively attentive to something in its drainage channel that had a near-zero biological signature and had just spent the past 3 minutes reading its internal structure. I made the decision before I'd fully processed all the implications. That's usually how decisions get made in drainage channels, with 6 seconds of reaction time available. I deactivated the ambush stillness, let my full biological signature come back online. All of it, the composite anomaly, the full energy complexity of 6 weeks of accumulated absorptions. Everything I'd been carefully suppressing for the entire approach. The effect on the root was immediate. The gravity sense felt the cavity shift its entire arrangement. The filaments in the channel walls went from passive to active all at once. The surface presence Ha Eunbi had detected extended downward, deeper, surrounding the drainage channel from multiple angles simultaneously. The cold intensified. The thermal extraction registered a temperature drop of approximately 20 degrees in the surrounding water and channel walls in under 5 seconds. The root was doing something with thermal energy, drawing it from the environment around me. Not an attack. The same mechanism, but different scale. What the Frost Lurker had used as an ability, this entity used as a natural process on a scale that made the dungeon creature look like a candle next to a building. The root was looking at me. That's the best description I have for what the filament activity felt like through the seismic sense and phase sensitivity. Every filament in the surrounding area was oriented toward my position, reading my signature, processing what I was. I stayed still. Let it read. The composition reading was still running, still building the map of the root structure. And now, with the root actively engaged, there was more to read. The communication filaments to the SSS hunters had increased their activity. The suspended nodes were responding to the root's heightened state. Something was being exchanged. Then something happened that the system had no existing category or precedent for, and it displayed a result I'd never seen in any previous absorption. The hunger skill registered an incoming signal, not an attack, not an absorption pull, a signal, directed specific, aimed at the composite energy signature I was radiating. The root was reaching out in the same direction and with the same mechanism that the hunger skill used for preliminary scanning. It was running its own version of an analysis on me. It was curious. I sat in the cold, dark water of the drainage channel and understood something that changed every assumption I'd been operating on. The root hadn't collected 3 SSS-Rank hunters because their energy was useful as a raw power source. That had never been the mechanism. The root had collected them because it was lonely. 47 years underground, no communication with anything at its own level of complexity. And SSS-Rank humans were the first things it had encountered that came close to matching its own cognitive density. Communication through integration, holding them in suspension while it learned how to talk to them, maintaining their biological state perfectly because losing them would mean losing the connection. And now there was something in its drainage channel that had a composite anomaly signature unlike anything it had encountered before, something that used an absorption mechanism similar in principle to its own collection function. Something that had been reading its structure with a clarity that suggested a complementary analytical ability. Of course it was curious. I activated the hunger skill's preliminary scan in active mode, directed outward instead of at a specific target. Not scanning the root, projecting the scan signal openly, saying in the language of absorption mechanisms, I can also do this. I'm also this kind of thing. The response was not immediate. 10 seconds of complete stillness, in which the only thing registering was the cold water around me and the active filaments through every surface. Then the root's analytical signal reached me fully, and the hunger skill, running on instinct I hadn't directed, did what it always did. It started copying, not the root's energy, not its power, the signal itself, the communication mechanism, the specific structured language of a 47-year-old collective intelligence trying to speak to something it had found in its drainage channel. The copy completed in 6 seconds, faster than any previous absorption, because the signal wasn't complex in the way skills and abilities were complex. It was elegant, the most refined possible version of a simple thing. A way of saying, I am here, what are you? I responded with the same signal, copied and reflected. I am here, what are you? The root's response took 40 seconds. In those 40 seconds, the gravity sense registered the cavity's entire arrangement shifting, the nodes activating in sequence, the surface presence withdrawing back underground. The root was rearranging itself. When the response came, it was longer than a signal. It was the closest thing I can describe as an impression. Not language, not imagery, but a structured transmission of information that the hunger skill's copied mechanism translated into something I could process. It had been underground a long time. It had found things it couldn't keep because they weren't strong enough to survive the contact. 3 things it wanted to understand. Understand, but couldn't reach because they were too different in structure. It had been trying to learn the difference. It was still trying. It knew I was different from the 3 things in the nodes. I was more like it. Accumulated, layered, built from many sources. A collective in one body rather than a singular entity. It wanted to know whether I could reach the 3 things held in the nodes and communicate across the structural difference in a way it couldn't manage alone. I responded, yes, but only if it released them intact. If the suspension was ended and they were returned to their full biological and awakened state, I could establish communication on their behalf. Translation between something ancient and collective and 3 humans who had been trying to understand what was holding them for 2 weeks. The root took 3 minutes to respond to that. 3 minutes, during which I sat completely still in the cold water and thought about the fact that I was negotiating with a 47-year-old underground collective intelligence through an absorption signal I'd copied 6 seconds ago. Normal Tuesday. Totally routine. The response came as a shift in the nodes. The composition reading registered the change. The 3 human biological signatures in nodes 11, 23, and 31 began to change state. The suspension reducing. Biological activity increasing toward normal levels. The filament connections maintained, but no longer the primary support for their biological processes. They were waking up. I activated the phase sensitivity to map the fastest route from the drainage channel to Node 11's position. Through the east wall of the channel, through 8 meters of root compacted earth. Earth that the root itself could reshape through its terrain control. The earth moved. The root reshaped its own compacted geology. A passage opened through the 8 meters between the drainage channel wall and the cavity edge. The root reshaping its own compacted geology to create access. Not a large passage, barely enough for a human body to move through horizontally. But there, phase shift active. Through the channel wall, through the passage, the root had opened into the cavity itself. The cavity was larger than the composition reading had suggested from outside. The gravity sense had read the absence, but not the scale. It was 40 meters across at its widest point and nearly as tall. The walls lined with the root's filament network in patterns that caught the faint bioluminescence the root's cellular activity produced. Node 11 was a structure at the north wall, a rounded formation of root material roughly 3 meters in diameter. The composition reading showed Park Jung-ho inside, biological activity now at approximately 60% of normal and rising as the suspension reduced. I approached the node. The root's filaments registered my movement and the passage tracked me, not aggressively, more like a guide path lighting up as I moved through the space. It was showing me where to go, contact with the node surface. The composition reading gave me the exact structure, the interface between the root's material and the human biological signature inside, a boundary that the root had maintained with precision for 2 weeks. The extraction process was something I assembled from available components in real time. Phase shift from moving through the root material at the node boundary, through the root material at the boundary. Terrain manipulation to assist the root in reshaping the node structure. Accelerated regeneration transmitting through the physical contact to support Park Jung-ho's biological systems as they came back online from the suspension state. The node opened. Not violently, deliberately, the way you'd open something you'd been protecting rather than containing. Park Jung-ho's body was intact. No marks, no damage. The suspension had been perfect. He wasn't conscious yet. The biological return to normal was taking time. I supported him physically and moved toward the access passage the root had opened. The root's filaments stayed completely out of the way during every extraction. It was cooperating fully. Whatever the exchange had meant to it meant to a 47-year-old collective intelligence that had been alone since before I was born. It had decided this outcome was what it wanted. Ha Eun-bi, I messaged through the signal protocol as I moved. I need retrieval support at the surface, one at a time, starting now. Her response was immediate. Ready. What condition? Alive and intact, I sent back, unconscious. Coming up through the Port Warehouse Foundation access, coordinates following. The coordinates came from Ryu Hanjun's environmental memory, the Foundation access tunnel that ran adjacent to the cavity. Now that the root had opened a passage through its eastern wall, I could reach the Foundation tunnel directly. It took 40 minutes to move Park Jung-ho through the passage, up through the Foundation tunnel structure, and to the surface access point where Ha Eun-bi was waiting. She had brought, I didn't ask how, a transport solution, something that looked like a maintenance vehicle, its weight signature suggesting it had been arranged without guild involvement. Park Jung-ho was settled. Vital signs stable. The biological return to normal was continuing without assistance. Whatever the root suspension had done, it had been careful enough that undoing it didn't require medical intervention. He would regain consciousness within 2 hours, probably. I went back down. Node 23, Yoon Sarah. The process repeated. The root cooperating with the extraction, reshaping its own material to facilitate the removal of someone it had spent 2 weeks trying to understand how to talk to. 28 minutes. Yoon Sarah to the surface. Ha Eun-bi's expression when she received the second unconscious SSS-Rank hunter was something the emotional perception could barely categorize. A convergence of 4 years of planning suddenly becoming real. Third descent. Node 31. Choi Min-ho. The root's cooperation was complete and continuous. The passage stayed open, the filaments guided rather than obstructed. The node opened cleanly when I reached it. 22 minutes. The third extraction was faster than the first two. Practice makes the difference, even in situations with no precedent. Choi Min-ho to the surface. Ha Eun-bi had all 3 SSS hunters. The transport was loaded. Everything had taken 2 hours and 14 minutes from the moment I deactivated the ambush stillness. I stood at the surface access point in the early morning dark and looked at the 3 most powerful hunters in the region. Unconscious in the back of a vehicle, alive and intact, and about to become very confused about what had happened to them. Then I went back down. Ha Eun-bi's voice through the signal protocol was sharp. What are you doing? Finishing the conversation, I sent back. The root had done what I'd asked. It had released 3 people it had been holding for 2 weeks. Whatever it had been hoping to achieve through the integration had been given up in exchange for the promise of communication through a different channel. That promise required follow-through. Back in the cavity, the filaments were at a lower activity level now. 3 of the nodes empty, the root processing the change. The emotional perception, which normally read living biological beings, was picking up something from the root's distributed structure that I hadn't expected. Not emotion in the human sense, but something that functioned like an analog of what the emotional perception was designed to read. The closest human equivalent I could find was the specific texture of someone waiting to see if a decision they'd made would work out the way they hoped. I sat in the cavity and established the communication signal again. The copied mechanism from the root's own signal reflected back. What I transmitted, in the best approximation the hunger skills translation could manage. They're safe. They'll wake up confused, but intact. I can't guarantee they'll understand what you were trying to do, but they'll be alive to have the conversation. The root's response came as another impression, longer than the first exchange, more complex. The accumulated cognitive density of 47 years trying to express something that didn't have an efficient form in the signal mechanism. It had been trying to learn what humans were it communicated, not to harm. To understand something that had appeared in large numbers above it, had changed everything in the world, and had never once registered its existence. It had collected the 3 strongest examples it could find, because it thought strength correlated with the ability to communicate across the structural difference. It had been wrong about that assumption. The strength hadn't been the relevant variable. The ability to communicate across structural difference required something else entirely. Structural difference required something else, something that accumulated from many sources rather than developing from one. Something like what I was. I understood. And because I understood something that had been waiting for 47 years for anything that could understand it, I made a decision that wasn't on any plan I'd discussed with Ha-Yun-Bi. I let the hunger skill copy the root's communication mechanism fully. Not the signal I'd copied before, the complete mechanism. The full capacity of a 47-year-old collective intelligence's developed ability to reach across structural difference and make contact. It took 11 minutes, the most complex absorption the skill had ever processed. The system flagged it as integration in progress. Entity type previously unclassified. When it completed, the rank notification didn't show a standard rank. It showed classification update, composite anomaly, elevated. Standard rank parameters insufficient. Entity assessment pending. Pending. The system didn't have a number or rank classification for what I currently was. It was deferring to a future assessment that didn't exist yet. I stood in the cavity with a root's 47 years of communication development integrated into my composite alongside everything else I'd accumulated. The gravity sense showed the entire city above me. The seismic sense felt every building and road. The emotional perception read the specific quality of Ha-Yun-Bi's worry through 200 meters of Earth. I transmitted one more thing to the root before leaving, something that the copied mechanism let me express with a clarity that the preliminary signal hadn't been capable of. You're not going to be alone anymore. I'll send someone who can talk to you properly, someone who's been trying to find a way to do this for 4 years. The root's response was simple, immediate. A single signal that the mechanism translated without ambiguity. Understood. I will wait. I exited the cavity for the last time, through the passage the root had opened and maintained through the entire operation, up through the foundation tunnel, back to the surface where Ha-Yun-Bi was standing beside the transport vehicle, looking at the surface access hatch with an expression that the emotional perception read as somewhere between ready to be angry and too relieved to manage it. "What did you do?" she said. I felt the energy shift from up here. Something changed. I copied its communication mechanism, I said. The full version. And I told it you'd come talk to it. Properly. She stared at me for a long moment without speaking. The emotional perception registered something moving through the settled quality of her baseline. "It's been alone for 47 years, I said. It didn't collect the SSS hunters to harm them. It was trying to learn how to communicate across a structural difference it couldn't bridge on its own. That's what you would have found if you'd been able to approach it yourself 4 years ago when you first identified it. The same thing I found tonight." She was quiet for a long time. The emotional perception showed the settled quality in her baseline reorganizing itself around something new, not the settled quality of a decision already made, the settled quality of a situation that had resolved differently than planned and turned out to be better. "You gave it what it needed," she said, without absorbing it, without taking anything from it. "Copied," I said. "It still has everything it had before." Her expression moved through several things in quick succession. Then she looked at the transport vehicle. "We need to get them somewhere safe before they regain consciousness." She paused. "And we need to figure out what you tell 3 SSS-Rank hunters about where they've been for 2 weeks without mentioning either of us." "That's going to be a complicated conversation," I said. "Yes," she said. "Welcome to having allies." We drove the transport to a location she'd prepared. A building outside the sensor grid with enough secure space to handle 3 waking SSS-Rank hunters. Ha Eunbi had planned for extraction. She just hadn't planned for it happening on this timeline, with this resolution. Park Jung-ho regained consciousness first, at 5:47 a.m. The emotional perception registered the shift before he opened his eyes, the specific quality of someone transitioning from suspension to awareness without the transitional stages of normal sleep. He looked at the ceiling, then at me, then at Ha Eunbi. "How long?" he said. "Not where am I? Not what happened. Just how long?" 17 days, Ha Eunbi said. "All 3 of you, you're intact. No damage." He closed his eyes again. When he opened them, the emotional perception registered something that I identified as a hunter, categorizing a situation and filing it for processing later. He was functional. "What got us?" he said. "Something old," I said. "Something that didn't intend harm. The explanation is complicated, and I'll give you all of it when the other 2 are conscious." He looked at me again. "B rank," he said. "Maybe C, but the energy signature is wrong. You're reading as something that doesn't have a category." "Composite anomaly," I said. "It's an accurate description." He looked at Ha Eunbi. "She's different too," he said. "Also no clean category." "Collectors," she said. "It's a type of awakened that isn't in the guild database." He processed that. Then, "The entity that held us, it's still down there." "Yes," I said, "and it's not hostile. I'd like the chance to explain why before you report back to Iron Vanguard." He was quiet for a moment. 3 seconds? 4? 5? "Talk fast," he said. "I have people who think I'm dead." I talked. Ha Eunbi added context. By the time Yoon Sera and Choi Minho were conscious, we'd covered most of the framework. The root's actual nature, its 47 years of isolation, the communication attempts, the copying mechanism that had made a negotiated extraction possible where a forced one would have failed. The 3 of them listened with the specific quality of people who were used to processing information under difficult conditions and had long since eliminated the habit of letting emotional response interrupt the intake. SSS-Rank hunters didn't get to SSS by having slow information processing. Yoon Sera, the telepath, said, "I could feel it trying to communicate. The whole time I was in suspension. Something in the filaments reaching toward my signal and not quite making contact." She paused. "It was patient. It wasn't hurting us. It was waiting." She'd understood it better than the extraction plan had accounted for. 2 weeks of a telepath in suspension with a collective intelligence, trying to reach her through filament connections, had apparently produced a certain amount of mutual understanding, even without a functional translation mechanism. Choi Minho looked at me directly across the room. The composition reading registered him as physically enormous and in the specific biological condition of someone whose cellular repair had been maintained at near-perfect levels for 17 days. He was probably in better physical condition now than when he'd been collected. "The thing that held us," he said. "You talked to it." "Yes," I said. "And it let us go because you asked. It let you go because I could explain what it was trying to do and offer something more productive than holding you in suspension indefinitely," I said. He was quiet. Then, "What does it want now?" "To not be alone," I said. "To understand what's been happening in the world above it for the past 47 years. To communicate with something that can bridge the structural difference between a distributed organic collective and a human awakened entity." He looked at Ha Eunbi. "And you can do that." "She can," I said. "She's been trying to find a pathway to this specific conversation for 4 years. Park Jung-ho, who had been listening to all of this from the beginning, said, "What do you want? From this situation? From us?" That was the question I'd been expecting. SSS-Rank hunters who'd spent 17 days being held by an unknown entity, rescued by 2 unregistered awakened with undefined ability types, presented with a complete reframing of what the entity was and what it wanted. The immediate question after processing all that was, what does the person who did this want in return? Reasonable question. Expected question. And I'd had 6 weeks of survival instinct and situational pressure building toward an answer to exactly this. "Nothing that compromises what any of you do next," I said. "The route isn't a threat, and I'd like Iron Vanguard to know that before they deploy a strike team into the port district. That's the practical request." Ha Eunbi added, "And the sensor network expansion in the university district gets paused. Not eliminated. Paused. Long enough for some arrangements to be made about registered status." Park Jung-ho looked at the 2 of us for a long moment. The emotional perception read him as someone whose assessment of a situation was complete and who was deciding what to do with the conclusion. A composite anomaly who can communicate with ancient collective intelligences and extract 3 SSS-Rank hunters from a 47-year-old entity without any of them sustaining damage, he said. and a collector who's been operating unregistered in Iron Vanguard's primary district for 4 years without triggering a single alert. He stood up. He was very large in person. The gravity sense registered him as one of the densest human weight signatures it had ever processed. The SSS-Rank physical development was real and comprehensive. "You have 48 hours before I file a full report," he said. "Use that time to get registered. Because after the report goes in, Iron Vanguard is going to want to talk to both of you, and having registered status will make that conversation considerably more productive than not having it." He looked at me specifically. "Whatever you are, the guilds are going to need to understand it. There are things happening in this world that a standard awakened classification system isn't equipped for." He paused. "You might be one of the things that changes that." He walked to the door. Yunsera and Choi Minho followed, moving with the specific efficiency of people who had decided what they were doing next and were doing it. SSS-Rank hunters didn't linger. At the door, Park Jung-ho stopped and turned back. "One more thing," he said. "The entity down there, the root." "Yes," I said. "What about it? In the suspension it tried to show me something, images, impressions. I couldn't parse most of it, but one thing was clear." He paused. "There are more of them. Older? The root under our city is 47 years old. There are others that are significantly older, and they've been aware of the portal events from the beginning." He left. Ha-Eunbi and I sat in the empty room in the post-dawn quiet. The gravity sense registered the 3 SSS hunters moving through the city toward Iron Vanguard headquarters. Registered the root, 47 meters underground. Its filaments at rest, its nodes quiet, something in its distributed structure that the emotional perception could only describe as settled. "More of them," I said. "Older," Ha-Eunbi said, "which means more time to develop, more accumulated capability. The one under our city tried to communicate and couldn't bridge the structural difference alone. An older one that had more time and more development behind it might have managed successful communication on its own terms already." "The portal events from the beginning," I said. "The portals opened 20 years ago. Older roots that had been developing for longer than 47 years would have been present when the portal events started." She was writing in the notebook again. Small, precise handwriting. The specific quality of someone recording data they were going to need. 48 hours to get registered," I said. "After that, Iron Vanguard wants to sit down and have a very long conversation with both of us." She looked up. The settled quality in her emotional baseline had a new layer in it, something that hadn't been there before tonight, something that felt like the specific relief of someone who had been operating alone for a very long time and had just stopped being alone. "We should probably agree on what we tell them," she said. "We tell them the truth," I said. "Park Jung-ho's right. The classification system isn't equipped for what's happening. That's not a problem we created, but it's one we're apparently positioned to help solve." She closed the notebook. "Then, for what it's worth, the thing you did tonight. Going back down to finish the conversation, that wasn't in any plan I'd made." "No," I said. "It was the right call," she said quietly. I looked at the window. The city was fully light now. Morning in the district, students heading to the university, workers heading to jobs, the specific ordinary activity of a city that had no idea what had happened in its port district overnight. Somewhere, under the old port infrastructure, a 47-year-old collective intelligence was waiting, patient, as it had always been, but waiting for something different now. Not for something strong enough to interact with, but for something that understood what it was trying to say. Ha-Eunbi would go talk to it. I'd given it the communication mechanism to make that conversation possible. That was the follow-through. The sensor network was still calibrating. Iron Vanguard still wanted answers. The registration process was still ahead of us. The world was full of things that needed handling. And somewhere out there, older roots, with more time, more development, more accumulated capability. The portals had opened 20 years ago and brought monsters through from somewhere else. But something had been here first. Something that had been watching the world change from underground and hadn't yet found a way to participate in it. Rank. Unclassified. Skills. Composite beyond system parameters. Allies. One collector with 4 years of operational experience and a settlement to negotiate, but 3 SSS-Rank hunters who knew what I was and had chosen to give me 48 hours, and 1 ancient distributed intelligence waiting underground for a conversation that was finally possible. 6 weeks from a sewer. 1 useless skill. F-Rank Ghoul. The classification system isn't equipped for what's coming. Park Jung-ho had said that as a warning. I'd already figured it out. What he didn't know yet was that the thing the classification system wasn't equipped for wasn't a threat. It was an answer. Thanks for watching all 4 parts. If you want to see where this goes next, what the older roots know, what Ha-Eunbi's full story is, and what Iron Vanguard does when they find out a composite anomaly ghoul negotiated the return of 3 SSS-Rank hunters by having a conversation with an ancient underground collective, drop a comment and let me know. The story's not done.